Hello, hello. Hold on. Let's do my overlay. Um, Hello everyone. We are back for another rainy day in Taipei. It's been raining for pretty much a month here. Come on, let's see here. There we go. Got our comments up. I hope everyone's doing well. I wanted to start off by either talking about Faceless Men or House of the Dragon, whatever you guys feel is interesting. The I was thinking about Faceless Men recently, because Faceless Men are probably the weirdest um, uh, thing that George is writing about in Ice and Fire. Like, you can kind of go back to other writings of his and see things that are similar. Yeah, you can switch from like fantasy to sci-fi and stuff like that. But one of the things that's really weird and new is actually the Faceless Men. I don't know much else in his writing before for this. I saw something from Jesse here, which was, oh, I thought he had something about Davos. Um, I thought there was something about Davos's finger bones that I saw, but I wanted to talk about Faceless Men because yeah, Faceless Men are really odd in that George has never really written about um, an odd kind of death like cult of assassins before. Everything else, there's elements that are similar. There are elements of telepathy. There's elements of prophecy and other stuff he does. There's elements of like people controlling people's minds, sending visions. That's all really standard. Blended consciousness. Um, people vying for power. All these sorts of things you can find in other places. But the House of Black and White is really unique. It's kind of the first time he's written about something like that. So it's harder for me to even kind of predict what he's trying to say with it. Um, and so the thing that I think is kind of most interesting about it is perhaps it's relating to his feelings about nihilism. Because in his previous writing, he has a lot of stuff on nihilism that um, where he hates nihilism. Like, even though he's an atheist, he hates nihilism. So he wants some sort of philosophical belief of believing in the world and hoping for the world. Some sort of secular humanism that he's going for, and not something that the Faceless Men believe, which is like that somehow death is a good thing and nothing has a point, and all roads lead to this comforting death. Because his other writings, he has intense fear of death, where he describes looking off into the blackness of space and going insane. He has a lot of stories like that, like Second Kind of Loneliness or Dying of the Light. Deal or Song for Leah deal with this kind of like looking off into the blackness and feeling so sad about death. And the Faceless Man is the exact reverse of that. Like, no, actually, death is this great comforting thing, and it's kind of odd. Um, and so the it's really tough to know what he's doing with that. Now, especially considering Arya is like this major character, and if we're going by the show, she's gonna come in and kill the others at the end. Um, and so I do think about, like, when I did the Faceless Man series, and I guess it's been now like 5 years. It was probably one of the tougher ones that I did, and I do feel that a lot of my connections that I made in that are a little flimsier. Like, do I really think that Rorg and Biter are Faceless Men? I don't know. I mean, I think it's a little weird that Rorg is black and Biter's white, and they're traveling with Jock and Hagar, and um, they fear Jock and Hagar and things like that. Uh, I I don't know. I don't know. Even after doing that series, where I'm like, well, textually, there's all these like connections, but are they just thematic, or is he making them fear Jaqen H'ghar because he wants to make Jaqen H'ghar even more badass? Kind of like somebody beating up a wharf in Next Generation. You need to beat up a wharf to prove you're tough. Um, so, but then there are these weird things. Now, yes, Jesse had this comment that what do you think of Melisandre and the Faceless Men? Her bag of finger bones comment is very strange. And he does disappear for months between Davos 1 and 4 in A Clash of Kings. Um, the bag of finger bones, I think it's just she is hinting that one could, like, she did want to bring back that bag of finger bones that's lost after um, uh, after the Battle of the Blackwater. Um, is this maybe this means Storm of Swords, or I'm trying to think of when Davos would disappear from the story, because he's in jail for a lot. He's Davos is either trapped on a rock or in prison for nearly his entire story, right? He's either trapped on a rock, or he's arrested for trying to kill Melisandre, or he's arrested by Wyman manually. Just spends a lot of time in prison or on a rock thinking. But I think that it's a callback to that. I don't know why she's bringing it up. I mean, does she have the finger bones? Um, I don't know how she would get a hold of them. Right? They should be somewhere in Blackwater Bay, but um, it's intriguing. But I think George is mainly just making the comment that all of these different forms of magic, um, have similar roots. That a similar cause is making them happen. So when, like, if Melisandre can glamour, um, that her ability to glamour is the same mechanism as, say, a faceless man's ability to glamour, and that they all have their roots probably in some sort of basic level telepathy, mental abilities. Um, and I say that because Arya is wanted by the Faceless Men because, for some reason, she seems to have talent, and it seems an awfully big coincidence that she's of this telepathic family that can skin change and go back in time. And so I kind of think that it's all coming from the same uh, place, the same mental ability. Um, and so I think it's just that she's linking of magic. I don't know if necessarily Davos has ever been mimicked at any time. I mean, it would be something, right? That, okay, say she somehow got a hold of the finger bones, and I don't know how she would have gotten hold of the finger bones, but say she had it, and then they could have somebody glamored as Davos and somebody glamored as Rickon and affect the events of the North theoretically. But it'd be tough. I don't know how she'd get a hold of those finger bones, but um, I think that's the implication being made. I don't know. Okay, where are we at here? I was just wondering about stuff beyond the Bone Mountains and Essos. Let's look at the map real quick. So, because I don't want to. This is kind of thematically the same of what I was just talking about, in that there are all these elements that George makes uniform and draws parallels to, and I don't know if he's just making a parallel for the sake of making a parallel, or if he's um, or if he's has a common plot cause for everything. So what we're talking about here is here's our Westeros, right? And then this is, I didn't grab a great image, but the Bone Mountains are essentially, right here past Karth. And then I think this is the land of, like, the Jogos Nai and stuff. And then And then you get to a shy or something here. This is a horrible picture. I'm sorry for making you suffer through all of that. Um, I don't really think that George R. R. Martin has put much thought into the Essos world. I think that when you look at the place names, a lot of times it's just references to his other work, um, and you know he allowed Elio, when he did World of Ice and Fire, to actually write more than Elio expected, um, with regards to Essos, because I just don't think he really cares. Um, I think that there is some sort of he does have this kind of belief about myth, and there being kind of many myths all being similar, and the human there's a human notion that if a bunch of people have similar stories, that somehow there would be truth to that story. And I don't, and I think he kind of rejects that, actually. And this is mainly based on my reading of Night Flyers. Um, and I'm trying to think about, I'm trying to get a good a map that can be seen better. Here we go. Okay, let's see. Can I shrink this guy up? This is too big. Um, so the Bone Mountains are kind of here, and so you go past it, and you get the land of ET, obviously named after ET the extraterrestrial, but supposedly much like East Asia, an island of Lung. Get to a shy, Thousand Islands, probably named after the Thousand Worlds, even though it's kind of funny because it's like Thousand Island dressing. Like, he makes these like ridiculous jokes. Um, the Bleeding Star, the Bleeding Sea, the Plains of the Jogos Nye. The But yeah, if you read World of Ice and Fire, there's just a lot of tales about that, are somewhat similar to the others, or somewhat similar to Azor Ahai. And you're supposed to make these connections that these are all parallel, and that something happened in the early world that makes all of these civilizations have similar stories. But if we're going by Night Flyers, they all have similar stories, and all of the stories are mostly wrong. And this is kind of based on, like, yeah, if we look at the Earth, our Earth, there's all of these stories about the flood, and maybe that means there really was a great flood. No, there wasn't. Like, there was no Noah's Ark. There was no Rama and Sita. There's no I forget the story that where Delucan, for the Greek. And I think there's one in Gilgamesh as well, and things like that. But no, there was no great flood. Um, it's a ridiculous notion, and this idea that, well, if all of these people have the same notion, it must be true. Well, no, like, that's not true at all. Like, there was a time in which most people on Earth thought it was a good idea to do cousin marriages. And still a lot of people do, and we kind of know that cousin marriage isn't great. But just because everybody has the same idea doesn't mean there's truth to it. But that's all he's putting in there, is that we're supposed to read it and somehow think that Azor Ahai has more truth because there's all of these people that kind of believe it. But I think something else different happened. Just like there's the story of the Vulcan. All these civilizations have the story of the Vulcan, and they were all wrong. The Vulcan wasn't this intelligent civilization. It was a organism that was flying through deep space using telekinesis without a mind. From a dash of bitter, for a second I was like, a dash of biter. I'm starting to like these ideas of time travel in A Song of Ice and Fire. It fits nicely with other sci-fi ideas in this fantasy world. like Frank and Gregor in Post Apocalypse. Yeah, and now that I've been working on time traveling Bran, the finale, and there's something that I should have put it in part five. It really fit better, like timeline wise. But um, once I start looking into the sci-fi elements of time travel and George R. R. Martin's age and what he's into, certain things kind of become apparent. Like I realized that time traveling Bran is very reminiscent of a movie about sensory deprivation from 1980 with William Hurt. And I'll talk about that a little. But like these old, George R. R. Martin is really influenced by a lot of the sci-fi that came out around the time that he's writing. So like movies like Firestarter, for example, like can really influence him and things like that. There is this kind of sci-fi writer groupthink at a certain moment in time, and they all start writing about the same thing, and then they move on into something else. But there was a lot of things that were sci-fi writers were writing about in the late 70s and early 80s that they wouldn't write about today. So for example, one of the big things I'm going to be talking about is sensory deprivation. And today we don't really think of sensory deprivation as this big frontier of unknown. But in the early 80s and late 70s, we did. So, and we can see that, Bran goes in the darkness of the crypts and has sensory deprivation. And that's, a major thing that unlocks his telekinetic abilities, right? And so we put so much weight on sensory deprivation, as this huge thing for Bran to unlock his talent, or Arya to unlock her talent, but that was really a late 80s, like an early 80s, late 70s, like sci-fi thing. Now we kind of have like the world of sensory deprivation, and not that, it turns out it's not that big of a deal to have your senses. Like there's relaxing spas in every city now that do sensory deprivation, and we're not all gaining, fantastic telepathic abilities. But George was still in that mindset. So yeah, Frank and Gregor and things like that. Like, yeah, he when he writes things like for him, the creature from the Black Lagoon and Frankenstein and things like that were really important to him, which is why we have the Squishers. The creature from the Black Lagoon is definitely a reference to that, because when he was a kid, he watched those stories. He watched Frankenstein, and that was like a big movie for him. I don't know if there's anyone in my audience that thinks Frankenstein is a really like epic, like sci-fi, like fantasy sci-fi adventure that had like a huge like impact on their life. Like when we talk, we think about like the Matrix and Star Wars and stuff like that. Like, oh, the whole world being an illusion, like that kind of stuff, like, is hipper now, or at least was hipper 20 years ago, right? A lot of movies about the world being an illusion came out around the same time, like the 13th Floor, or that one with Jennifer Jason Leigh and Jude Law. They also, it goes through these cycles. So yeah, you kind of, you have to remember, like, he's a boomer who lives at a certain time, and so certain things are going to be more important to him. But it is still like sci-fi of a certain age, like if you're like, how important, oh God, like how important his favorite movie, Forbidden Planet is. Like Forbidden Planet is like, it's impossible not to watch Forbidden Planet and like think about Stannis and skin changing and all these sorts of things, because that's the whole plot of the movie, and you're like, oh, like that's George R. R. Martin's favorite movie, and he has a giant Robbie the Robot in his house that speaks all of the Robbie the Robot lines from the movie. And you're like, okay. But that's, a huge influence on him, this idea that, oh, when we sleep and we dream, that we can send our telepathic mind, but our subconscious telepathic mind, into something else. and affect the world. Like, well, yeah, that's this he thought that was a really cool idea. It really affected him a lot. Um, let's see here. Where are we? Um, do we hear from Faceless Men and Duncan Egg? No, but Bloodraven is definitely glamored in that as Plum. So there's definitely a glamour going on there. But so the same abilities, but I don't know if we ever see a Faceless Man. It's it's funny because we think about like a few certain things like finding a dragon egg and stuff like that, and dragon egg disappearing, and people connect like Euron and his dragon egg to the Faceless Men and stuff like that. I don't necessarily know if there's any Faceless Man in that. Um, let's see here. Um, Roose uses the same DNA tech as the House of Black and White. Visits Harrenhal with Rourke Biter and Jaqen for regeneration, rejuvenation. Arya, Qyburn, and the future zombie. Okay, there's a lot to unpack here. So, what I'm thinking about, so Roose is really into leeches, right? Um, and there's this idea that he's somehow using these leeches to somehow stay young and stay youthful. Um, visits Harrenhal with Wargbiter and Jaqen for regeneration, rejuvenation. I mean, it is true that Roose has Harrenhal at the same time that Arya is there with Wargbiter and Jaqen. Um, but I don't know about if there's similarities. There's some weirdness with regard to um, Jaqen at that time. Like he seems to have such incredible free reign of the castle, and he's able to go to the baths on his own and just chill out. For some reason, he chooses to eat meals with Rourke and Biter, who just are such violent psychopaths that you'd like. How could you possibly spend time with these creatures? Like they're just so outrageously um, ballistic and unable to manage. But I don't know about if I can make any connections between them all meeting, when they're there. Um, because Rourke Biter and Jaqen, let's see, they come in as part of Amory Lorch's crew. And then the Brave Companions come in, and Roose has the Brave Companions, and so the Brave Companions sneak in and take the castle from the inside, and then Roose takes over. And it's true that Rourke, Biter, and Jaqen switch sides and are able to keep going, which is a little weird, but uh, I don't know. It's a lot of stuff here, but I'm not sure if I see any connection between the weirdness of Roose and the weirdness of what Jaqen is doing. It all doesn't make much sense. It's one of those Arya's Clash of Kings adventures is something I've read many times in order to try to like make some sense of it. It was actually kind of one of the first things that bugged me. Way back in the day before I even started a YouTube channel, I I had I had been just posting on boards, and I was like, what the hell is going on with these different groups like the Brave Companions. I was really kind of like fascinated with the Brave Companions and who they were because they kept popping up. And so I went back and like tried to track like what the Brave Companions were doing, and so I went over like these events quite a bit, and I don't know if there's much rhyme or reason to it. I've tried to like come up with narratives like on maybe the Faceless Men were interested in Arya the entire time, which is why they were following her. and that they have, and that Rorg and Biter are Faceless Men, or at least tools of the Faceless Men. I don't know, and I was trying to come up with what Qyburn was doing and things like that. But it's a really difficult period to try to make sense of, and certainly like Roose being creepy, like reading that book and the leeches and everything. Um, I don't know if he's just they just put it in there to make Roose creepy, or what Roose read in that book that he burned in A Clash of Kings that all of a sudden made him want to go to the Red Wedding. I don't know. It's one of those things, like Roose's motivations is just one of those things that makes sense to so few people that we don't even talk about it as fans because it just doesn't make sense. I mean, there are these bolt-on theories, but those don't really make sense or answer what Roose is doing and what Roose's plan is, why Roose tolerates Ramsay. All these sorts of things don't really make sense. It's one of the biggest mysteries. Maybe in the future I should do a Roose Bolton series, because Roose Bolton has never made sense to anyone, let alone me. So, let's see. Hey Preston, have you thought about going back to the Genetics and Dragons and War series? And now that you have Fire and Blood to fill in the gaps, I think as I go through Fire and Blood, I'll be thinking about these sorts of things. One of the reasons, I always, before even they announced House of the Dragon, I did kind of want to go through Fire and Blood, line by line, and like really know that material, because it can be dry and boring, and so I really wanted to have a reason and motivation to do it. Now that with House of the Dragons coming, and I've got this series going, I think I'll get through at least the second half of Fire and Blood. But yeah, there's a lot of things I want to check on that with regards to my Dragon X theory, and whether or not people are whether or not it explains some of the actions, because there's definitely times where all of a sudden a maester is promoting a certain marriage, or all of a sudden a maester is like against a certain marriage, and I definitely hoping that it makes sense in the Dragon X theory way. But I don't know if I'm going to be pushing it too much in my overanalyzing House of the Dragon series, but it's going to be something I'm going to be thinking about in the background as I do this. Okay. Sorry about vacuum cleaner there. Somebody's vacuuming outside. Hopefully. Hey Preston, I'm rewatching the Littlefinger debt scheme, and at the end you introduced the relevance of Lothor Brune's identity, but never elaborated. Any thoughts since? So Lothor Brune. So there's two things with regards to like Lothor Brune. Like I think it's like, obviously it's really important that Lothor Brune is in love with Maya Stone, because that's going to make him really vulnerable to manipulation and influence later on. So I think that's an important aspect of him. And then there's his weird relationship to the Fossaways, like why he chose to kill one Fossaway and capture another, and the difference between the green and red apple Fossaways. Unfortunately, because sometimes somebody's just called a Fossaway, we can't figure out which house they're from, and so it makes analysis of the Fossaways and who they follow difficult, and who they're marrying, because sometimes we just hear Fossaway, and so it's difficult to figure it out. You almost feel like there's something in there with regards to going back to Dunk and Egg and the Fossaway split that's somehow going to be relevant later on. And did Lothor Brune do his thing by accident, or did he was it intentional? Was he trying to create division between the Fossaways again? And so we'll see about that going forward. Now, Lothor Brune's identity. He says that he disagrees and doesn't fit with the Brunes in Cracklaw Point. which is kind of an interesting idea. Like, what is it about the Bruins um, that caused him to have a split with them? We kind of know that Dick Crab had a problem with the Bruins. That the Bruins probably impregnated his wife, and I mean not his wife, his sister, and then didn't marry her, and that she had to go off, and um, she was kind of expelled for dishonoring her family, and then became a sex worker. Um, and so I do wonder if, like, is Lothar Brune related to those events? Um, I don't know. I, the Yeah, I'm trying to think if they're, you know, George just hasn't released enough information on what the Bruins are doing yet. But there's so many interesting aspects of Lothar Brune that I think are going to be useful. Also, like, another thing we don't know is where Lothar Brune was given a lordship. I think he was promised a lordship somewhere, and we're not sure where. And so that's another thing. Like, there's all these unwritten aspects of Lothar Brune's, like, plot that George is definitely planning for the future, um, but hasn't put in yet. So I have to go back specifically when I said this, because it's been many years since I watched Littlefinger Death Scheme, about the relevance of his identity. Like, we don't know which House Brune he's part of. We don't know why he seems to have a split from House Brune. We don't know if it has anything to do with Dick Crab. Um, we don't know where his new lordship should be. We don't know how his love for Maya Stone is going to be exploited. There's a lot going on there. There's a lot going on, but he's probably going to become one of Sweet Robin's um, Kingsguard. Uh, yeah, this is the movie we're talking about, Altered States. I'll talk about Altered States a little bit when in Time Traveling Bran. But Altered States, it's definitely a movie that got in George R. R. Martin's head. Like, there's too much stuff in other writing around the same time period where you're just like, oh, that's definitely the thing. Um, let's see here. One thing the sci-fi on the sci-fi thing with Dr. Tachyon losing his hand in Wild Cards, and Jamie, I was wondering if that inspired, and then I was wondering what inspired what, and then one day I was like, oh yeah, Star Wars. Um, yeah, definitely. There's definitely some of that, but uh, I'm trying to think. Some people think that there's a lot of biblical reference to Jamie losing his hand. That there's something to do with, if thy hand offends thee, cut it off. And Jamie has made the reference that, like, oh, this is the hand that he uses to touch Cersei and all of that. Which also goes back to, like, of Mice and Men, where George wears doesn't George wear a glove? I might be confusing Steinbeck stories or whatever, but or Hemingway with a I might be confusing Hemingway with a Steinbeck story. With I want to say there's a story about guy wears a glove with Vaseline in it so that he can have one soft hand to touch his wife. I'm not sure. I'm trying to remember what that was. Um, but some people say that there's a lot of relevance to that Jamie's hand is more of the biblical, like, it's the hand that sinned, it's the hand that pushed um, Bran from the tower, it's the hand that touched Cersei, and therefore he needs to cut it off, and or needs to be cut off in order for him to have some sort of a redemption. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, even with Star Wars, like, there's like 2 seconds in Return of the Jedi where where Luke, like, looks at his hand and thinks about, you know evil being in his hand and things like that, but and it being like Darth Vader. But other than that, it didn't seem like there was much like sadness to losing your hand when you can just get a robotic one that looks exactly the same right afterwards. Like Jaime spends a lot of time mourning his hand and mourning being a knight. Like it was everything. Like his ability to fight is everything to him because fighting is so important in this society, right? Like it's akin to Theon losing his penis because it's his manhood. Like his ability to fight is his manhood in this society. Theon's, penis is his manhood in this society. You take those things away, are they men anymore? And you start exploring, the sex and gender of everything and the Brienne story and stuff like that. A White tried to stick his fingers in Jon's mouth. Beric is revived with air. Lady Stoneheart with an Ironborn ritual. Dragonbinder requires blowing. Could be airborne. A White tried to stick his fingers in Jon's mouth? Really? I have to look that up. That's really weird. That he would be... I have to look that up on the fight again. Because that's odd. I do think that George is definitely like conflating all of these rituals to try to say that all of these things are similar, are similar kind of things like kisses of life and stuff like that. Not sure if the parallels like make much difference, but he's oh gosh, I need to, I don't know. I think he's just kind of making the statement that all of the magic and all of these religions have have a similar basis. But I've got to think about the Beric revived with air. Like, didn't Thoros give him the kiss of life as well? And Lady Stoneheart gets the kiss of life, of course, which is going to be similar to Aeron. Aeron's being, of course, just CPR, but yeah, this one, I mean, Aeron's being kind of a fake one, but at the same time, like, yeah, you're right that there is this blowing aspect. Are you just sending out a piece of your telepathic mind or something with a blow? Is there something going on like that? Huh. I don't know. I have to think about that one. Is there any chance George will release the rest of his books closer to the end of his life so he can avoid the criticism of his ambiguous ending? I mean, I think he's delusional and will think he's gonna, keep on living until he's not. But I think most of us live with that delusion, right? That we're completely fine and that we're gonna keep on going. I did think about. I recently was listening to George in an interview. I think it was with the new showrunner for House of the Dragon, Ryan Cog. I've got. I think Ryan. I don't want to get these names wrong. Ryan. I'm gonna mess it up, so I don't even want to say it. Ryan Condal. I think I was listening to an interview with him with Ryan Condal where he was talking about, and he briefly started talking about A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons, and that split. And so the first time that Ryan Condal met George R. R. Martin, he was heading to a book signing at a convention in New York, and it was for the release of A Dance with Dragons before they knew they were going to split it into A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons. So he actually went there and got a sample chapters for A Feast for Crows, but it was A Dance with Dragons, and it was 2 Daenerys chapters that they handed out, even though this was before Feast for Crows even happened. And George R. R. Martin said that he had a situation where he had 11 or 12 chapters for one character written, but then none of another. So I think if what he has, if he does have any progress, it's going to be like one character all the way written to the end or near the end, and then other characters not. So I think you might be able to figure out some of the events around it if that's the way. But I don't know if he would release it. I mean, you have to see if Paris does after his death or something like that. Maybe interesting though. I mean, maybe you could really figure it out from the other stuff. Um, I rewatched Frey Civil War recently. My question to you is, how much of Westeros do you think Littlefinger will control directly and indirectly? Uh, I think. I mean, it depends if Littlefinger remains alive, but I do think that he's as the head of Harrenhal, that at least in name he's going to be coming in and controlling the Riverlands. So at least briefly. I mean, we only have very briefly right before the end of this story. Like, even if we think that Winds of Winter would take, a year of time, let's be and then Dream of Spring, a year of time. Um, he doesn't have that much time to get in there and control things. So I do think that yes, the Vale forces are going to come out and they're going to take the Riverlands, and then who knows what they're going to do after that. But so many things point to the fact that the Vale forces will take the Riverlands. George he's placed too many marriages with the Freys, with Vale lords. He has too many wards in the Vale that are Freys. He's given, he's made, Littlefinger the head of Harrenhal, and Elaine Stone the heir. So I think for the most part, yeah, he'll just, if there's I think there'll be a quick declaration for Aegon for a lot of stuff, and then the second Dance of the Dragons with Dany coming in, maybe different houses will disagree on who to follow, and maybe that can be traced back to whether or not they're supporting Littlefinger or not, or the different Frey factions. But I think that that's definitely the way things are going, that the Frey factions will transition to the divisions between Aegon and Daenerys. And Littlefinger's will be part of that transition as well. He's probably going to align with certain Frey factions. So I mean, I think at least half of the Riverlands, because he'll have like half of the Frey factions probably aligned with him. I think it'll be something like that. But if this book ever gets released, but I am pretty confident that a Vale invasion of the Riverlands is happening, and that. But we'll see if Littlefinger will be alive for it. I'm way behind here. When is Trey going to call in? I talked to Trey a little bit. I offered to him that he can call in, whatever. But I think live stream is really intimidating, because you can say something really stupid, or if you haven't had time to think about something. Some people aren't so great off the cuff. I'm not really great off the cuff. I'm stumbling all over the place. But and so I think it's not everybody just wants to be live, because that's we'll see. We'll see in the future. The Roose keeps his energy levels low to not go mad like Ramsay. They have the same original Kings of Winter, dilute it with marriages. Could be. Of course, I did have a video that actually that Ramsay is not Roose's son, so we'll see. We'll see. But like I say, like Roose Bolton is one of those huge mysteries that I would have to do a series on to really get into and explain. Do you think it's significant that Westeros and most cities use gold and silver coins, but Bravos uses iron ones? I do think it's somewhat significant, but at the same time, like I think it's a kind of half baked um, George R. R. Martin idea. So I briefly talked about this in my podcasts with Trey the Explainer, actually. So one big problem in the ancient world was the fact that you couldn't just there was actually a lot of deflation going on. You read old histories, and the salaries for soldiers are remaining roughly the same over the course of 100 years, and modern economists know that you want moderate inflation is good for an economy. You want to feel, and the reason for this is that you want citizens to feel that the money in hand is losing value as they hold it. So they should go out and buy something. While if you have a deflation situation where you think your money in hand will become more valuable if you hold it, you're more reluctant to go out and buy something. So the idea is that moderate runaway inflation is a bad thing, but moderate inflation is considered a good thing in economics. So in the ancient world, you kind of had this system of things were made out of precious metals, and you can't just print more precious metal. I mean, that's really tough. You've got to go and mine it. And so, like, say there's a downturn in the economy, and you want to, make people, you want to somehow stimulate the economy. It's really difficult to just introduce more currency in. And so there are various techniques they used, like public works programs where they paid people in food, and things like that. Like the pyramids were actually a public works program where they fed people with very good food in order to build these pyramids, and keep people employed, and things like this. So I think he's making a statement that with iron, which has much less value than gold or silver, that's a process of printing money. And then he kind of has his chapters later with Tyrion about the going on and on about promissory notes for gold and in Casterly Rock, and how they don't really mean anything, and everything's based on a promise. And I don't know like what statement George is making by having this switchover. Like there are a lot of like loons out there that think that the lifting of the gold standard in the 1960s was this like horrible thing, and that now our money has no value and stuff like that. And of course, like money has value when you think it has value, which is of course like one of the themes of Ice and Fire. Like power resides where people think it resides. So I think he's making some sort of statement about money getting to the point where it only has value because people think it has value, unlike when it was gold and silver. Though in truth, gold and silver only has value because people think it has value. So there's no effective difference to lifting the gold standard. But for some reason, like George has made this a plot point, like the lifting of the gold standard. And I think Braavos having iron coins is that kind of statement. Like they can keep putting out iron coins as much as they want, while the rest of the world can't. They're stuck with gold. So like the Braavosi have this like power over everyone, but it's kind of also imagined and self-created. I think that's what George is trying to say, but like I say, it's a little half-baked, and I don't think George really understands economics that much. So, but I think he's making some sort of statement about the value of money and the value of power, and it residing where people think it resides. Anyway, that's kind of convoluted. I probably could have written a much more comprehensive essay about that, but this is kind of But hi there. Can Demeric be Roose in disguise? Roose is close to Rickard Stark's age. He looks so young. I think it has to do with where Demeric died, because he. Did Demeric? Let me look at this. Because I know Demeric was fostered somewhere for a long time, but then people thinks that he died. Oh no, he died at the Dreadfort fairly recently, actually. I didn't realize Demeric actually died in 297, like right before the events kind of begin. Could he be Roose in disguise? I mean, I suppose though I don't know who would have been like running the, because Demeric was fostered, right? Somewhere. I think he squired for. Demeric went to the Vale for 3 years, and was fostered by the Red Forts. So, if he did that, who would be running the Dreadfort for? Who would be the Lord of the Dreadfort for 3 years? I think that would be like the big thing, like somebody being like, "Well, where did Roose Bolton go?" I don't know. who's gonna who's gonna do these finances? Who's gonna collect these taxes? I don't know. I think that's the biggest thing. Is way behind here. There's all these other conversations in the chat that I'm like go by and I'm like, oh, this is pretty good. What role do you think will Arch and Tatters have? They're a riot. I love Arch and Drink and Tatters. And I mean, a lot depends on whether Quentin is alive, but I think the most obvious thing is that the Tattered Prince cloak is going to be worn by someone, whether it be probably Drink. And that's just set up in the fact that, like, okay, the Tattered Prince doesn't look like anybody, and that anybody can wear his cloak and become the Tattered Prince and be glamored, essentially. We've seen this a million times. This gets back to the finger bones. It gets back to Renly's ghost. It gets back to so many things of mistaken identity that you can just put something on. Mance with rattle shirts, bones and all of this, that you can just put something on and take on somebody else's identity. Maybe even getting to Aegon and Daenerys, like whether they're real or not, and this is all, hinting at this, that identity, even identity power resides where people think it resides, right? Like it, if you could just put on a cloak and become somebody else and that's it, like that's power, and totally lead an army, and affect the world based on a myth, is part of this. So, I mean, Faceless Men, like all of this, it all comes back together. Like, so the Tattered Prince cloak is definitely 100% chance going to be used by somebody besides the Tattered Prince to pretend to be the Tattered Prince. And so I think, there's going to be some sort of defection or whatever, and that Drink has taken on, because there's a good chance the Tattered Prince died with Quentin, in that situation. So, like, if Quentin is not alive, let's say Quentin died, maybe the Tattered Prince died as well, and and that's the reason that Arch and Drink are being so cagey, because we know that Arch and Drink are lying about something. The question is, what are they lying about? Are they lying about Quentin being alive? Well, if they're not lying about Quentin being alive, what are they lying about? And it might be that they were hiding the fact that the Tattered Prince was with them, pretending to be one of the guards, the other Windblown. And that's something they have. That's a little power that they have, is that they can take on the identity of the Tattered Prince and all of a sudden have this power. So I definitely think that that's happening, that Arch and Drank are going to take control of the Windblown. And, what they do with the Windblown and whether Quentin is alive, like, depends a lot. But I think they're definitely going to be taking over the Windblown. And that information was being hid from Barristan. But I think that's where we're going. Okay, gotta go through these fast. Do you know what parts of A Song of Ice and Fire are inspired by Star Trek? George R. R. Martin is a fan of the franchise and was trying to get a gig as a writer on Next Generation. Yeah, I imagine. I'm trying to think of like because it's going to be the original series stuff that he's going to be a huge fan of. I'm trying to think of trying to think of some notable. Um, like I don't know any off the top of my head here. Let me think if any come up real quickly that I can think of. Um, I mean, probably, certainly, one of those ones. There's an episode of the original series where they find Apollo in space, and it's part of that idea that old gods were actually human beings that had visited Earth, which essentially became the Eternals and all of this kind of stuff. But that was super popular in the 60s and 70s. This sci-fi idea that gods are actually like aliens or advanced civilizations that had visited us first. I think that's probably one that affected him. I'm not saying Star Trek invented that idea, but there's an old one about like them finding Apollo in space. Um, there's probably I'm trying to think of probably some misunderstanding ones, where there's that silicon-based life form one where they're killing it and they don't realize that they're crushing all of its eggs and things like that. I imagine that would be one that influenced him. I'm just guessing though. Um, but I've never heard him mention which one specifically he was into. Um, but it's the original the original series is more, and it's more episodic, and it is more like Twilight Zone than say later Star Trek, which is adds more action element to it. I'm trying to think 10 best. Uh, yeah, we'll see. Yeah, I don't know any. I'm trying to think any that maybe Trouble with Tribbles, because he wrote about that. I mean, he writes about population incidents like growth of overgrowth of population and ever expansion and in tough voyaging. That idea is probably in there. Um, but I don't know. I'll have to go through them and really think about it. I've never researched that. I've never come across something where he mentioned the Star Trek episodes. Um, is Cersei a self-hating lesbian? No, Cersei's definitely heterosexual, and she pretty much only explores bi-curious because she's trying to become like Robert. But after she has her experience, she doesn't even enjoy it. She was just trying to do a power thing over Tana to feel like Robert. But we have nothing. We have nothing to hint that she's actually a lesbian. Um, hey Preston, do you think that who do you think is the worst Song of Ice and Fire character? And if they were still alive, what would you do with them? Let me let me think about that for a second. The worst, the worst Ice and Fire character. Uh, hmm. Um. See, for me, it's like stuff that's just lazy. Like some people think that like George naming a character other Shet is like funny, and I just think that like that's just super lazy. Like, oh, so you named a character like some other piece of shit, like other shit. Like I just think that's stupid. It's just I mean, he doesn't really have much of a personality yet, so he just kind of included it in there. I'm trying to, but that's not a great answer. Like I want a character that really annoys me, that they exist because they are just fundamentally um like bad as a character. um let's see. I mean, going down. No, Pip. I'm fine with Pip and Gren. Sam's fine. John's fine. I'm trying to go to the north. Um, Chet Walder. Uh, like a character I really just don't like. I like the thing is other characters that people don't like. Some people don't like Darkstar and things like that. And I'm like, nah, I like Darkstar. Um, I'm just trying to think of like somebody that's just like a lazy creation that that should be more. I think I kind of think that the Kettle Blacks are really lazy. Um like if the Kettle Blacks were one character, that would be one thing. Um but instead the Kettle Blacks are essentially like three dumbasses who are like interested in sex and are tricked by Cersei um like in a crew. And I do think like that would have been fine for one character, but you're going and creating three nearly identical characters um, who are who are willing to really risk their lives and kill people and murder people for sex with Cersei. Like it's a little basic and dumb and hastily written. Like I wish if the Kettle Blacks had variance in their personalities, I think it would be a little better. Um, there's some slight variance, but not much. So I think if I were going forward with the Kettle Blacks, I would have like them join completely different causes for completely different reasons. Like I would have one of them. I would have it's Osmond Kettleblack is in the Kingsguard. I would have him like switch over and be a true believer, like true believer in like the white cloak, and have him like completely switch over, and then have Osfried and uh gosh, now I'm even like forgetting, like they're so interchangeable that I'm forgetting their names, and you're supposed to like forget their names, right? Confuse Osfried and Oswell. No, it's Oswald Kettleblack. No, Osmond Kettleblack is in the Kingsguard. Um, no, no, wait. No, Osmond Kettleblack is in the Kingsguard. Osfried, commander of the city watch, and Osney, sworn sword to Cersei Lannister. Like I would make them very different personalities. Like with regards to like Big and Little Walder, we confuse their names, but they're violently different characters, and it's great that they're violently different characters. But man, to have to have uh, to have them be not that different from each other and to have all the same names, I think it's really lazy, and he should have had them be more distinct. They all look the same. They all act the same. Do something, George. Do something. So I'm going with the Kettle Blacks are the worst characters in the stories, and that he should have tried harder with them. Um, Lemon character holding his hand in front of his mouth, grinning. Oh right, this is Thank you, but yeah, this is Carmine informed me that you have to that my software like takes emojis and then like describes them out. So oh gosh. All right, where are we? Gosh. What do you think about the theory that Tywin and Rhaegar intentionally orchestrated the defiance of Duskendale and an attempt to usurp King Aerys? Um, I think that's I think that's definitely a possibility. I've looked into the Defiance of Duskendale previously, and now it's slipping my mind the exact details, because there was something about um the Lord, like it's he wants to it's about taxes, right? And he somehow doesn't want to pay his taxes, um and he may have gotten some sort of assurance from Tywin, um, that was gone back on, and that this was purposely done in order to try to get rid of Aerys, and then that Barristan somehow undid the whole thing by accident. Um, the yeah, Dennis Darkland ceased to pay his taxes. Aware of the strained relationship between Aerys and Tywin, he invited Aerys, and then petitioned um, Tywin to eventually have control. Yeah, I mean, it could have been. It could have been. But at the same time, it could also just be something that, like, a piece of history that's meant to add ego to Tywin. Um, it's certainly possible. I have to go back and really, really look at it again. Because, I mean, the Defiance of Duskendale's, like, purpose in the narrative, for the most part, is in the Brienne story, and we're supposed to be thinking about how his Dennis's girlfriend is treated and how they blamed her for everything, rather than, and then we're supposed to also realize that Aerys was a nuts guy, and that Jaime killing him was a good thing. And so, I mean, that's the narrative function of it. Is we're supposed to be, one, highlight the sexism, and then two, highlight the fact that, like, breaking your oath can be justified for the right reasons. But you could add, if we're going to add even more to the background of it, was it all Tywin's fault? Yeah, I mean, I'd have to go back into it, but it's possible. But I don't think it's how it's presented, narratively speaking. It's not presented that way. Like, if we were to establish that Tywin was the one that orchestrated it, then you're kind of taking blame off of Aerys. And if Aerys is now innocent because he was forced into this stuff, then Jaime is killing kind of a guy who was really the result of his own father. It makes things much more complicated, but I think it's possible, but it's definitely not how the Defiance of Duskendale is presented initially, narratively speaking. Though you never know what happens in the future. Da, 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 da. All right, I'm getting way behind. Let's make sure I get, because when people, what am I doing? Oh, no plural. Okay. Roos, yes. Okay, Littlefinger. Wildcard's Hand. Dragonbinder. Release. Roos, okay. Arch and Drink. Star Trek. Worst character. Oh, I missed this one. What do you think of Aegon Bloodborne Frey? Could he possibly be aligned with the Brotherhood? Also, who kills Cleos and why did they run away? I've looked into the Cleos thing a million times, and I'm just like, oh my god, like, it's so convenient that Cleos Frey dies, like, narratively speaking, like, because it causes so many problems and so many issues. But at the same time, like, to have, I'm trying to think, like, to want to destroy House Frey that early in the story is a little weird. Like, if Cleos had died later, like, say Cleos had died in A Feast for Crows, or after the Red Wedding, mainly is what we're talking about. Say Cleos had died after the Red Wedding, we would say, okay, that was probably the Brotherhood without banners, right? Like, trying to destroy House Frey and have House, like, because once Cleos Frey dies, then all of a sudden dairy becomes an issue, because there's and things like this. We got to go into the the, the we're gonna go into the family tree here. I think there's so much there's a lot of problems when Cleos Frey dies, I think. Let me see here. Okay. Let's see here. So after so because Cleos is dead, um he would be, because he was married to a dairy, you could say that he would be the one getting dairy. But then again, Cleos no, Cleos was on the right side the entire time. So he could have been rewarded with dairy had he stayed alive. Because he, unlike the rest of the Freys, stuck with the Lannisters from the beginning because of his mother. And so it would have been his. And then there was also some discussion about who would get him, being the son of Emmon. He's also in line to get River Run if Emmon were to die. But now, because Cleos is dead, there's all these confusions because some of these characters are dead and or wards somewhere else. And so there's but the point being, because Cleos died, we have issues at both River Run and Derry with who is going to take those castles, and so leading to a Frey civil war. So it is awfully convenient that Cleos dies. However, it's a lot of forethought. Like, it's a situation in which you're like, oh my gosh, like, you would have to know about the Red Wedding and have to know that the Freys were going to do this. I mean, maybe a time traveling Bran could pull this off, like, or a Blood Raven. Like, it's like high level puppet mastering to know that Cleos Frey is going to be so important, because he's treated like a piece of shit by Jaime in A Storm of Swords and everybody else, like, just being this guy that has to walk back and forth across the Riverlands, like bringing messages between the Lannisters and the Starks. It's sad, and to know that he's, in retrospect, like, so incredibly important. But who would know that? Who would know that things went the way it went? I mean, again, maybe Bloodraven or time traveling Bran, somebody really high up. And so it would have to be some sort of, like, stooge of them. If he had died later, I'd say the Brotherhood Without Banners, but not at that moment. Like, at that moment, I don't see why someone would want to attack Cleos Frey. Because the Red Wedding hadn't happened yet. So I don't know. Like, it would have to be. If there's ever a solution, because he could have just been killed randomly for no reason, because George needed Cleos to die plot wise. But I would have to say, like, if you're gonna get some logic to it, it would have to be somebody. It would have to be a high level puppet master that would know how important Cleos was going to be. Aegon Bloodborne is kind of in the same situation. Like, he's clearly somebody that, like, George has added to the plot, knowing that later on there's going to be a Frey Civil War dispute. But we don't know there's going to be a Frey Civil War dispute until the Red Wedding and things like that. So he's just this character that George has, like, kept in his pocket, and he's going to bring in later. He'll probably be involved in the Frey Civil War. I'm trying to think. Aegon Bloodborne, because Aenys is now dead, which of course is, like, impossible to have predicted, right? Like, who knew that Aenys was gonna die, and then Rhaegar is missing too. So, Aegon Bloodborne should be aligned with House Royce. So if you're talking about a Frey civil war where Royce Freys are involved, that they would maybe he would side with House Royce, as he would probably be a peer all of a sudden and be like, I'm the real heir to whatever, the twins. Um and get with align himself with the Royce army or something. I think that's what would happen. I mean, he's just been something that's in George's pocket that he's gonna pull out later, probably during an invasion. Um, da, 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 tattered cloak made of pieces of opponents' cloaks. Iron throne made of fallen enemies and rival swords. Strange connection to Aegon. I mean, this is true. The Iron Throne is just this symbol of power that doesn't really mean anything, and they try to legitimize it by adding pieces of other people that doesn't mean very much. It kind of gets into this idea of like primitive ideas of cannibalism, that if you eat your opponent, you like gain his strength. They even did this in Breaking Bad, where Walter White, like, I call him White. Walter White like starts doing activities of people he's killed, like like taking the crust off sandwiches and putting a towel down before he kneels and things like this. Um, so that, I guess, this idea of cannibalism and it all being imagined. I mean, George is very much into this idea of everything being imagined. Um, Terribly off topic. Just saw a video of young Ozzy performing Crazy Train. Um, you think I might look like Ozzy Osbourne if I if I put on an '80s hair wig? Huh? Never thought of me as young Ozzy Osbourne. Oh, let me see here. I'm not saying I look um dissimilar. So the thing, Ozzy's got, deep set eyes, chubby cheeks, like me, kind of medium sized nose, things like that. Um, I'm not saying we look dissimilar. I'll tell you, the actor that some people have said I look like, which especially when I had more hair, was the guy from That Thing You Do, which was more. Um, Let me bring this up. Because I kind of also had this like deep set eyes. His nose like angles down more, but he has this strong brown eyebrows, deep set eyes, and then so some people thought I kind of looked like him. He also has a goofy smile, and I have a goofy smile. So, but I suppose. Um, Favorite secret id theories, like Sorella Sand is a Laris Shay, or Mance Raider is Arthur Dana, the elder brother of Rhaegar. Uh, we are looking at these because George R. Martin revealed some, or because they're more out there. Um, so I don't think Sorella. Well, I mean, I think Sorella is a Laros, but I don't think that Sorella is Shay, and that's just mainly because it's a big jump from what George R. R. Martin is basing the character on. So Sorella Sand originally appears in a completely different book called Windhaven, um, which he wrote with Lisa Tuttle. And Windhaven, which, if you read it, it probably there's more Ice and Fire references to Windhaven than probably any other story. Like, the Eyrie is in is in Windhaven. There's a great council. There's a calling of the great council. There's Maris. I mean, there's so many Marises in Ice and Fire. Pretty Maris being the most obvious, but Fisherman's Daughter, all these sorts of things. There's so many references in Windhaven to random stuff. Val is a character in Windhaven, you know. So Sorella is a student from the South who is a big studying student, the best, dark skin, female. It's every description of her is physically the same character as Sorella Sand. So Sorella from Windhaven is Sorella Sand, who is a Leros. Like it's I would say that it's not even, you know, that's not even in question. And so I just don't see how it would be Shay. Like it's just it'd be a big jump considering the source material. Like you've got this student, and it's clearly a student who's from the South, who has dark skin, who's really good at what they do. You know, and I think Sorella shouldn't be there. She has to like, because Windhaven is all about only the elite class are able to fly, and so I think Sorella is one of the new recruits that is from the commoner class, that kind of thing, you know. And Sorella being a bastard and being a woman and being it just thematically fits too well. I think if anybody out there is going to be a character that's hidden, that has a past, I want to go with Lemoncloak and the Elder Brother. I think those characters, their backstory is going to be important, and I do think, you know, Richard Lonmouth being Lemoncloak makes sense with all the hints that we've kind of gotten. The Elder Brother is the one that's more interesting. I do wonder who that could be. Some people suggest Jonathan Derry or somebody, but I think the Elder Brother's identity may be important. I don't necessarily have too many guesses. I think, you know, Jonathan Derry, that's a fine guess, but it doesn't really add too much to the story. Like, we're just like, okay, he's Jonathan Derry, and I guess that means he's going to be for Aegon because the Darys are for the Targaryens, you know, that kind of thing. Like, maybe, you know, I guess, but you could pick any loyalist and have the same results, so it doesn't matter too much. But I don't know if I have any favorites. Like, the one that I thought was the coolest, that would have added most to the story, was Euron equaling Daario, but that's just not true. So that was proven wrong by the Forsaken chapter. So it's too bad. But that'd be fun. It'd be fun if I'm trying to think of any others that I think are relevant. I mean, I've heard a lot of different Mance Rayder as blank ones. Mance Rayder is Rhaegar. Mance Rayder is Arthur Dayne. They're interesting, but I don't know if it needs to happen. Trying to think of any others where we really need to know their identity and that it's been a big mystery. I think that's it. I think the two that we need to figure out are Elder Brother and Lemoncloak. But I don't think any, like, the story necessitates any other secret identities too much. But we'll see. Well, we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe somebody can come up with one. Love your stuff. Challenge you to give me a season 7 and season 8 compliments. Okay. Let me think about it for a second. I mean, the low hanging fruit is like people's different people's acting abilities, like, in their role. Like, okay, like we kind of all loved Randall Tarley's actor and his portrayal of things, and you know, and things like that. but I think that's too easy. Or like to say that, oh, the cinematography or the direction of this was great, because that's pretty easy. I'm trying to think of stuff where it's really like of the like not like we all have kind of accepted that you know the direction can look great and the acting can be great, but I'm trying to think something like story wise that I thought was clever or good that worked. Um, uh, I mean, I think a white dragon did that. I'm trying to think of like the white dragon. I think the white dragon is fundamentally a good idea. I don't know if that was George's idea, probably, but I think that is definitely something that's fun and neat and unexpected. And I full Daenerys needed some sort of foil to battle her dragons against because she's overpowered, and I think a white dragon like is a pretty fun good idea, a zombie dragon. So I'm fine with that. I'm trying to think some other things that I think are really good. Um, uh, because I liked I liked the twist that when they got to um Casterly Rock, that Casterly Rock had been abandoned for a military move to have Jaime go down to take uh Highgarden. Like I think that was a clever ploy, and I like the fact that like Jaime is played up as this great uh general. Like in general, I like that. I do think that like obviously like having Euron's ships arrive out of nowhere, and then the resulting of just having the Unsullied walk across the continent and taking Highgarden off screen so easily, like without much explanation. I think that's not great, but I do like the fact that Jaime redeems himself by having such a clever move by sacrificing his home and then uh taking Highgarden instead. Like I think that was well done. I think that Brienne writing Jamie's story in the end is a beautiful scene, even with the ink drying goof. But like, I think that's a fantastic scene that closes his story well. I think the Jamie story is perhaps the only one that kind of ends well because of specifically because of that scene. Like that is it's a really it's that's a really well done, beautiful scene. Um, I would have set it up a little different. I think if you've watched my fixed videos, like I think had they really pushed, they really emphasized that Jamie was keeping his vow to Cersei because he loves Cersei, and they that would have been better. That in the end that he was the greatest oath keeper. I think that would have been a added to it. But it's the fact that he like made the most of his life is a great way to end things. Especially, I mean, I'm conflating a lot of book and show themes with Jamie, but I think that scene is done really well. Trying to think anything else that I really liked. Um, let's see. Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. Mm. Oh, you know what I really liked? I thought that the final battle where there's zombies like literally falling out of the sky, like it's raining zombies at that battle. I thought that was hilarious, like incredible, over the top um, thing to have. Like, And I thought it was brilliant because you don't know if the zombies, are they falling off the wall, are they falling off dragons? Like, it's such a ridiculous moment for John to be like running around and seeing like piles of bodies and zombies literally falling from the sky. I thought that was a brilliant thing to add. I mean, granted, that's like direction again and everything, but I thought that was, I really thought that was hilarious and cool to have, and like, oh, so over the top. Like, how do we keep one upping ourselves in this show? Well, zombies raining from the, like, zombies, so many zombies, they're raining from the sky. Anyway, I hope there's a few there. Um, let's see. Selmy saving Ares led to the death of many people, which contrasts Jaime, but didn't Selmy save Duskendale from being sacked while Jaime didn't stop his father from sacking King's Landing? This is all true. That's a very good point to bring up. It's funny because it's like, there's all these like utilitarian things, like when I do something now, how many people am I benefiting? But then down the road, how many am I benefiting? I recently watched, Peacemaker, and one of the things he says in that, because his neighbor is making fun of Peacemaker, and he's like, "Wait a minute, you're not a superhero, you're a supervillain." And he's like, "I'm a superhero," and he's like, "Really? Do you have a rotary of supervillains?" And he's like, "No, because I've killed them all." And he's like, "Well, Batman doesn't kill his supervillains." And he's like, "Right? How many people has Batman inadvertently murdered because he didn't have the guts to kill his villains?" And then it gets into like, Pycelle's thing about like, how isn't it better to kill Daenerys and save all of these lives? Well, Pycelle has, legitimate point. So yeah, no, you're right. Like, there's definitely some issues here. But but I think it's, supposed to be just like, okay, was saving Ares worth it? Was being a good Kingsguard really worth it on a simple level? But I think it's a good point that yes, he's saving everyone's life. But then again, wait a minute. No, Ares puts them all to the sword anyway, right? Maybe not like Ares like kills. He saves it from being sacked, but I think they got to look up how many people died anyway, because um certainly the whole family, like, but I'm trying to I have to, I've forgotten if it's down to like the soldier level and how many died. um Defiance of Duskendale. Yeah, let's see. He killed all of his family, his uncles, his aunts, his kinsmen, Holler, all of House Hollard. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess you're right. Oh, the lands and incomes of Duskendale, the lands of Hollard were taken away, their villages burned, their castles torn down. So you're right that maybe some random soldiers might have survived, like random people, if we're thinking about small folk. But I think the point that George was making, was that saving Ares actually like led to the deaths of like the murders of all of these people, and it was pretty rough. But it's a good point when you start thinking about the small folk. Yeah, and that's the debate to have. That's okay. Um, I've enjoyed your crossover with Carmine. I'm diving into George R. R. Martin's other work. Any recommendations on the order to read them? Um, so you might find out there, there's floating around the internet a compiled uh, Thousand Worlds kind of thing, and that's kind of, it's compiled more or less in a chronological fashion, not exactly, but um, That's not necessarily starting with the strongest works. So I mean, I think if you're going to start with George R. R. Martin's other works, I'd just start with his strongest. I'd start with like Song for Leah. I'd start with Sand Kings, and I'd start with like The Glass Flower. And if you like those three stories, um, you know, you can keep going and trying to find others. It doesn't really matter what order you read them in, except for maybe Tough Voyaging. But you know, his universe is very, very loosely connected. I mean, a lot of these stories that take place in the same universe, the Thousand Worlds universe the story takes place over the course of 1,000 years. And so like each story is about 100 years apart on a world that's incredibly distant from the last world, where very little relates to each other. So they're very independent stories. So it um, doesn't really matter which order. But I would start with the stronger ones and work your way down to the weaker ones. I think you should read, and so I always say, and sometimes Never Kill Man, Song for Leah, Sand Kings, Glass Flower are some really important ones to read. And then, if you like them, you can tackle something bigger like Dying of the Light or whatever. But okay, could Burn Them All be similar to Hold the Door? Could it been to make Jaime kill the king, or killing the king went against a singular timeline? I don't think, at least I don't think time traveling Bran would have done that. It's possible that some other uh, previous time traveler, if there were a previous time traveler, and I don't know, but it's possible that they could have done it. But the but I don't think it was time traveling Bran, and I only say that because I don't think it's a time loop. And I'll talk about this in part 6 some more. I mean, I've mentioned in the previous parts, but like the big difference between a time loop and a single changeable timeline is that when you have a time loop, you don't need, like, the events are there to justify themselves. They don't really need a purpose. You'll have some Twilight Zone episode or Outer Limits episode where a guy goes back in time and, has sex with his mom, and then births himself. And then, she's like, oh, and he goes back to the future, and she's like, oh, you left me just like my husband did. Oh, and he realizes he was his own father. And like, that time travel was just for the sake of itself. Like, it was only justifying itself. And the big difference is that everything time traveling Bran does seems to have a purpose. It's not just there to make the loop happen. Like, Hold the Door is helping Bran escape. If anything, he's breaking the cycle of time travel with Hold the Door rather than fulfilling it, which is kind of the weird thing about the show. The show makes it look like he's fulfilling itself, and Hold the Door is breaking the time cycle. He's making it out of the pit. Because the pit is definitely, the sinkhole back door is definitely where Bran is time traveling. And so Hold the Door and Mira Reed are helping him break the time cycle. So with Burn Them All, how does that help Bran, like, break the cycle or go forward and destroy the others? Because, his point is, like, dealing with the others, I imagine, because he's, the three-eyed crow tells him, now you know why you must live. So Burn Them All, like, how does it advance that? Now maybe it was something else. Maybe, I mean, I'm open to it being some sort of puppet master that was trying to cause war and do all these things, but I don't necessarily think it's part of a time cycle. Because I actually think that that Bran's time travel is specifically to break the time loop, not to enforce the time loop. Okay. Thoughts on fake Quentin, real Quentin hanging out in Norvos all this time? So fake Quentin, Bran Voss was the first person to kind of put forward the idea of fake Quentin. But I don't think it thematically fits at all. Like, the Quentin story is very clearly about George R. R. Martin not going to Vietnam. So George R. R. Martin has written many times that he feels that he got PTSD from not going to Vietnam, that he was the only person that somehow like became obsessed with the war and guilty about the war and felt the trauma of war having not been there. Just watching TV and reading about it, he had this trauma. And so all of his writing is about Vietnam. Quentin looks like George R. R. Martin. Okay. His physical description is George R. R. Martin. In fact, I want to bring it up right now. His the description of Quentin, because this is kind of important. It's kind of important to be thinking about 18-year-old George R. R. Martin when thinking about Quentin. Quentin is short-legged and stocky, thickly built, plain face, brown hair, brown eyes. He has a high forehead, a broad nose, and a square jaw. That description, you know, here, let me pull up young George R. R. Martin here. This is youngish George R. R. Martin. Oops. Can't do that image. Here we go. Youngish George R. R. Martin. You know, he's stocky. He's got this high forehead. He's got this broad jaw. He's got this broad nose. He's brown hair, brown eyes, plain looking. Like, it's Quentin is George R. R. Martin. So Quentin's story is being sent off into war. When people talk about, oh, Quentin's story is subversion of the hero's epic, you're like, no, like that's not it at all. There's no Joseph Campbell in George R. R. Martin. Okay, there's no Joseph Campbell in Star Wars. That was a retroactive like thing that George Lucas said. Okay, so like the hero's journey is not Quentin. Okay, Quentin is about George R. R. Martin going to Vietnam. That's what it's about. Okay, so he's sitting there like talking about, like in his first story of The Merchant's Man, talking about his friends dying. And then later he's like, what did my friends all die for? That was the exact justification that was being used for Vietnam at the time. Like, why did we go to war? We have to stay in because what did these other people die for? Well, they died for nothing. Okay, that's the whole thing. They died for nothing. Cletus dies for nothing. That's the fundamental point of Cletus dying, is that it gives guilt and it makes Quentin keep going on and keep pressing on when he shouldn't. He arrives. He's immediately in the Merchant's Man chapter pulled into the Windblown, promising adventure in war, which is like this big thing relating back to the Broken Man speech and how people were seeking adventure. And then he goes, and in the Windblown chapter, he sees all of the horrors of Astapor and everything that happened at Astapor. And then from then on, he's nuts and he keeps going on with his quest because he's like, why did we go through all this suffering if not for something, for pleasing his father or whatever? And then, you know, he either dies or he doesn't. Quentin staying in Norvos or not being there the whole time or being in Volantis or whatever, like, that takes away from everything. Like now I could perhaps like buy that George R. R. Martin did write a story about one character going off to Vietnam and one not, and then them meeting each other and needing to merge themselves. So, I mean, I could come up with a story where the real Quentin is in Norvos and he comes back and he feels really guilty about this other random kid dying in his place and is somehow has trauma with it. But that would take a lot of writing to get to that point. Like, not that it couldn't be done, but I just think that there's this too much established that this is a story about PTSD and the horrors of war. And that if you have a fake kid not doing it the whole time, what was kind of the point? So anyway, sorry for my little rant on that, but you know, it'd be something. I mean, if young Griff were the real Quentin, he would have to meet Arch and Drake, and they would have to tell him about the trauma of Quentin, and then he would have to be riddled with guilt about Quentin dying, and that be a central part to the story or something. But yeah, it's just too much. It's just there's too much of George in Quentin for me to believe that Quentin is a fake, um, for the most part. Um, Isn't the whole point of the Kingsguard that even the best and most honorable is still propped up by a corrupt system? All the excellence and bravery is fundamentally wasted. Yeah, I do definitely think that this is part of it. I do think that there's something philosophical as well. So Kingsguard, they're all about dogma and not really having a fundamental philosophical moral code to start with. They just kind of default to whatever the king does. And defaulting to whatever the king does is there's nothing moral about that, you know? If you just default to a dogmatic like set of beliefs, there's no analysis and there's no philosophy to that. You're just assuming that what the king does is good and I'm going to follow the king. Which is why, like, when Sandor Clegane like talks to the Brotherhood without banners, he just crushes them on a philosophical level. He's like, "What, you're Kingsmen? What the hell does that mean? That means nothing. Like, who are you following? Robert Baratheon? Because that guy was a piece of shit. You know, like what? He wouldn't have cared about you. Like, if you could, I think he says if you couldn't fuck it or fight it, it bored him. You know, it's a fucking great line. But I mean, you are right that yeah, like if the system is corrupt and you're just following a corrupt system, then that's great. But I mean, that's not going to lead anywhere because I think George R. R. Martin fundamentally believes that you can't just like align yourself with a simple dogmatic list and think that's morality. Like you need to come up with morality yourself, and that's done through self-examination, existential thoughts, and all that kind of stuff. Let's see. Any chance that in the book Jaime's Kingslayer name goes from moniker he hates to one he's proud of because he kills the Night's King? Um, that's a fun little idea. It's fun, though. I do still fundamentally think that like Kingslayer is about other people defining him, and Jaime wants to define himself. Um, and so, you know, but I do think that would be a fun little thing at the end if he ends up killing the Night's King, and he's Kingslayer. That'd be all right. What are your thoughts of Bran becoming mirroring Aegon the Fifth becoming king? Um, John Bloodraven had a claim to the throne. Kinslade, Dany, Aenys, Great Council grows their nephew, who will send them to the wall. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's something about the unlikely aspect of Aegon the Fifth and Bran. I mean, Bran is I guess he's a second son. We were expecting John, and then he became crippled, and so no one had expected that he would ever do anything after that. And um, you kind of go through the possibilities of all of his siblings first, right? That I think we explore Rob's claim to Winterfell. We explore Arya's, even Rickon's. I mean, at least fake Arya, Rickon's, Sansa. Like everybody's trying to take Winterfell through different claims. But that's just Winterfell. I'm trying to think about the Iron Throne. I mean, yeah, it's pretty unlikely that this kid would get the throne. I think the biggest line that kind of foreshadows it is right in the beginning where I think Ned says something about Bran can be High Septon, but he's not going to be, I forget if that's in the Arya or edited chapter, but he can't be a knight or something like that. Someday he may be the lord of a great holdfast or sit on the king's council. He might raise castles like Brandon Builder or sail a ship across the sunset sea or enter your mother's faith and become High Septon, but he'll never run beside his wolf again. And so, maybe he'll be all of those things, through his skin changing and his control of the world. That's but I guess, can I be king's counselor or build high castles and become High Septon? Yeah, I mean, I guess there's this idea that he's definitely the unlikely character and that he's going to win. There are a few stories where George R. R. Martin likes to subvert expectation and choose the least likely character to win. There's a story that he wrote, and it was kind of just a throwaway story called A Night at the Tarn House. And the Night at the Tarn House, it's this kind of weird story where three characters kind of end up at this. It takes place in the dying Earth universe, and these three characters are at this kind of weird hotel, and they're actually there to all be kind of eaten. And this kind of pathetic character ends up winning and leaving, and you wouldn't expect it because the other characters are much more competent, and he's just like, he slips out, and it's kind of weird. And it's a subversion, and George likes subverting expectations, so I think he thought that Bran becoming king would be a neat subversion, the last person you'd expect. And then, I don't know. I guess Aegon the Unlikely was also supposedly this person that no one would expect. Though, let's be honest, Aegon the Unlikely was probably engineered by Bloodraven the entire time. So yeah, I think there's definitely some parallels there. Bran the Unlikely, the second son of a lord. Yeah. Do Westerosi hate women or cripples more? I think they hate cripples more. I think it's because it's a fighting based society, and at least women can occasionally fight. Even though it's a little contradictory, I have to say. Like, George R. R. Martin invents this world where women are subjugated and it's incredibly sexist, and then he throws in just fighting woman after fighting woman after fighting woman, like all arising at the same time. Like, you've got Asha and Arya and Brienne and the Mormonts and the wildlings and Pretty Maris and all of these people, like, and the Sand Snakes, and they're all getting thrown in. You're like, Westeros is so sexist, except for the many fighting women that I've put into this story. So it's a bit of a contradiction. You'd think with the inspiration of so many strong women that it would have thrown off their society a little bit, but whatever. In the show, Bran insists that he's not Brandon Stark. Rather, he's the three-eyed raven who is in Bloodraven's body. I think he says he's the three-eyed raven. I don't know if he says he's Bloodraven. Oh, who was in Bloodraven's body. I think it's this idea that the three-eyed raven is a position of like all-knowing that has so much knowledge that you kind of cease being the original person. Like, George R. R. Martin definitely plays with the idea that we're nothing more than our memories. And so if you can save your memories, you'd save yourself, right? And so he's got a whole bunch of stories about what is human consciousness. Like, if you want, like, The Glass Flower is probably his magnum opus on the idea of human consciousness and what it is. And if you have the chance to read The Glass Flower, like, it's a beautiful tale and it's a real mind bender. And it really gets into this idea of what George R. R. Martin's talking about. But even if you take a simpler story like Night Flyers, a character uploads her consciousness into a computer, and the consciousness exists, and it even has telepathy and telekinesis, like as a consciousness in a computer. So I think the idea is that, Bran, he learns enough knowledge, he gains all the knowledge of the world, and so he's no longer Bran, because Bran would be this tiny little sliver of knowledge, and so he's much more. It's the kind of the philosophical question of if you compared yourself to your 8-year old self, like, yeah, your 8-year-old self is you, but is it really you? You've had so many more experiences. What's so that I think that's what he's saying, that he's that the Blood Raven in the show also had massive amount of knowledge, so he's become the three-eyed raven, he's taken the position, he's become this embodiment of all human knowledge, and now Bran has become the embodiment of all human knowledge again, and thus is the three-eyed raven, and no longer Brandon Stark, because Brandon Stark would be the sliver of knowledge. So I think that's what he's saying, Thus, he's not really Bran the Broken either. So it's like kind of all contradicts itself, right? They don't totally hate women because of boobies. It's true. Also, women have a function for them. How would you use telekinesis and telepathy to explain Maggie the Frog and Patchface's predictive abilities? Well, first off, I don't think Maggie the Frog predicted anything well at all. Like, I think Maggie the Frog is not very impressive. Like, all she says is like, you're gonna have 3 kids and your kids are gonna die, and then Robert is gonna have what, like 16 kids or something. One, we have no idea how many children Robert has. It doesn't seem to be anywhere near 16. So we have no confirmation that Maggie did anything. And Cersei chose to have 3 kids. Like, she heard the prophecy and then she went and had 3 kids. So in a sense, it's just like some sort of weird suggestion, right? That Cersei chose to do it because she told her that she was going to be queen or something. And predicting that the daughter of Tywin Lannister was going to be queen is also not really that big of a prediction. It's Tywin Lannister's daughter. Like, it's not. She's going to be queen one way or the other. So, Maggie the Frog, nah. Now, Patchface is a little different. Maybe he has glimmers into time traveling Bran, or time traveling Bran is able to, enter him or something. Maybe he gets the same sort of whatever the House of the Undying is collecting, because the House of the Undying seems to have some sort of idea of what's going on in the universe. And including the future, and we don't really know how or why. House of the Undying, by the way, is a mirror of the Weirwood Net. So you have collective consciousness. These are the Undying. The Undying are just a bunch of warlocks who are in a groupthink. That's all the House of the Undying is. It's a bunch of warlocks and a groupthink. And so the question is like, what are they doing with their groupthink? It's the same as the Weirwood Net being a groupthink of Children of the Forest's minds or whatever. But somehow they're getting this vision of the future, or various visions of the future, and we're not really sure why. Maybe they can read time traveling Bran's mind. Maybe they have a time traveler. I don't know. It's hard to say. But I think maybe Patchface is somehow in tune with the same sort of whatever they're receiving or whatever they're getting into. Maybe he got some of that too. I mean, some of Patchface's stuff seems eerily accurate, but then again, we might be reading into it because he just speaks cryptically. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm getting to the point where I'm getting lazy. I'm just like, time traveling Bran did it all. Society is sexist despite the prevalence of strong women. Yeah, George R. R. Martin would argue that um, it's sexist because of the prevalence of strong women. That that society is designed to keep them down because they are strong, not um, and so that's would be his argument that women are actually probably stronger than men, and the only way that men can actually survive and get by is to is to create a sexist system to keep them down, you know. Um, George R. R. Martin criticizes heraldry succession because Dany is special, because of special genes. What is the point that George is trying to make? I mean, you're right that kind of, there's definitely this contradiction, and we see this in Star Wars too. Like the Jedi come from this special line, and then Ryan Johnson comes in and is like, isn't that kind of a shitty, racist, exclusionary idea? Yeah, yeah, no, it is. What are we gonna do? So George, it's kind of the same kind of situation. Like he definitely criticizes the entire system, but at the same time, like, and the system being crappy because of heredity, um, and but at the same time, like unfair in a political sense, unfair in an economic sense, all of this kind of stuff. Because let's be honest, George R. R. Martin is probably a communist, the like literally, but like the but at the same time he's so attached to sci-fi ideas about genetics that it's that it's tough to divorce them, right? Like and it's not like he's not aware of these things. Like the Valyrians are clearly Nazis and they have Nazi ideals, but at the same time, like it's just too cool of a concept that like a master race would have special genes to make them like fly on dragons. So it's a little weird, but then again, he always has a character like Nettles who like breaks the system too. So I do think there is a bit of a contradiction that the things that he thinks, you know, I guess we see it too. Like as much as Nazis are the worst, like people can't stop making movies about Nazis, and somehow Nazis are cool even though they're horrible. There's this weird contradiction. Like Raiders of the Lost Ark movies. There's people love making these movies, or Castle Wolfenstein and things like that. Like yeah, you're killing them, but at the same time, like there's something else there. Um, so I think it's a weird thing. I think he does think that like genetics and is cool, and people having special abilities because of genetics is a cool idea, but it's also a morally repugnant idea, right? That like certain people are going to dominate because of their special genes, like so it's um yeah. Undying as a Vulcan. That's pretty funny. That's pretty funny. um let's see. All right, so I think we're Nazis dressed in spiffy uniforms. That's about it. Yeah, I think I think that's most of it. They had a lot of lore, a lot of spiffy uniforms and symbols, things like that. Um, Swastikas are rubbish fashion. That's true. Buddhists like them too, though. So you know, another thing I'm going to be clipped for. You know. um, Hugo Boss uniforms is the reason for Nazi saturation. Yeah, it's weird stuff. It's weird. I mean, it goes beyond that though. There's a weird. It goes beyond Nazis though, because there's a weird fascination with like very harsh um, militaristic societies in our culture. Um, like, people's fascination with Vikings is, or the Spartans, like the Spartans, like threw children into valleys. Like, okay, like they weren't great. Like, but all of a sudden there's this obsession with these, certain groups, um uh let's see, do I get a lot of hate for my feminist vibes? I wouldn't say I get a lot, in the sense that I think most people that watch me are probably feminists, and but I think that the loudest voices, the anti-feminists, have loud voices. So I always see them in the comment section, even though that most people are probably feminists, and agree with, equal rights and removing barriers that hurt women and things like this, and kind of recognize that our society is sexist and needs to be less sexist. Like, that's where most people are. But like, if you believe this fairly reasonable, not so um uh not so spicy take, uh you're not going to comment. You're going to comment when you think the opposite, and you're like, and you hate feminists. It's funny, I say spicy politics section because I say it ironically, because like, I'm I don't have extreme positions. Like, I'm a I'm a liberal. Like I'm a liberal in America, which means, like, globally I'm pretty centrist, right? Like, there's nothing super crazy about me, right? Like, I'm a capitalist who believes that we should have social programs to help the poor, to make sure that society doesn't fall down, like, I believe in equal rights. Like, these aren't like incredible takes, like, but somehow on the internet, among neckbeards, like, saying very reasonable, middle of the road, uh, like, ideas is hard. Like, so, um, I mean, this is a good point. I'm not going to say that uh, you know that um, I'm not going to have some sort of, like, blinders on and not think that my own positions are extreme. But I'm going with, like, politics in America and the candidates I vote for, and where they are on the political spectrum, and who I end up running into in life. Um, I don't think I hold anything crazy. Like, there's nothing I believe that you're not going to see, like, uh, at least 40% of Americans, like, agreeing with me on. And so it's, you know, I'm going to support Chad, capitalism with social programs and equal rights. Like, I mean, that's literally, like, how all of Western society, like, exists. Actually, it's probably all of the world right now, and yet somehow it's spicy politics. Um, yeah, exactly. How dare I'm not, how dare me for not being in favor of forced births and things like this. Like, the thing that's legal and safe and legal in all industrialized countries. How crazy that would be. I would think that abortion should be safe and legal for women. Oh, Jesus. It's only in all industrialized. Oh, I've never made it to a Preston live stream. I'm so excited. Well, Pamela, welcome. I guess maybe you're European, and so, I've been doing these mainly on American time, and the Europeans have been angry at me. Um, uh, what do I think about those Canadian hogs in Ottawa? Uh, I I only saw a few interviews with them, and they seem like they're like Americans. I mean, Canadians. This is bad take. Canadians are going to be really angry, but Canadians are kind of like more American than Americans, in many ways. Like, they're more nationalistic than we are. Like, you're going to see more people with maple leaf tattoos and maple leaf patches on their backpacks than you'll ever see in America. Like, especially like people that are like world travelers and stuff, and they're still like Canadian pride, and you're like, yeah, gay nationalism. Okay, okay. I mean, so there are certain aspects, like they have a lot of guns in Canada. They love the whole like outdoorsy independent living kind of thing in Canada. They have irrational love of things Canadian for the sake of it. Like, like in the same way that Americans do. I mean, not that the whole world doesn't do that kind of stuff, but so in many ways, like they're just so American. And so it's so, but I mean, they do have healthcare, so you gotta grant them that. They're one up on us there. But it's so when I see something in Ottawa where they're like, oh gosh, it's so horrible that we have to get vaccination mandates. I'm just like, dumb people everywhere. But these movements are in Europe too now. It's pretty. Now, on this one, I can't say I haven't seen Americans do. I don't want to say that no American has ever done it. I've never run across an American that's done it. I've had one conversation where someone was like, when you tell people that you're Canadian, they treat you a lot better. And I'm like, dude, in most places, people don't understand the difference between a Canadian and an American. Like, do you think like if an Austrian like traveled to America, in most places, people would understand the difference between an Austrian and a German? Or like if an Australian or a New Zealander, like, do you think if a New Zealander like was traveling around America, he would run into people that differentiated between New Zealand and Australia? Like that differentiation wouldn't be made by most people. So like, even though there are big differences between Canada and America, they're so nuanced that other people don't know them. Like our accents, like certain parts of Canada, I can tell the difference between a Canadian and American accent. But if you take a Vancouver accent, I can't tell the difference between a Vancouver accent and an American accent. Like if an American, like I can't differentiate like Canadians from Americans, how would the rest of the world differentiate Americans from Canadians? Like no one is doing this. Like, no, it's not like some Canadian is going in the middle of like, I'm just picking a random country, Turkey, and being like, oh, I'm Canadian, and some Turk is going to be like, I hate America, but yay, Canada. Like no one would do that. Like Canada like sides with America on all of its imperialistic endeavors. Like there's nothing like politically great for a Canadian to like stand behind, like when they're abroad. So it's kind of funny that someone would try to hide being an American as a Canadian. Like if you're gonna hide, why not pick a better country? Like like try to say like I'm try to pull off being from New Zealand, This is the thing is, I don't know if I'd say vast, relatively speaking. Like if I'm going to take the world, right? And I'm going to take two countries sitting next to each other. And I'm going to say, okay, the differences between, like, what can I name two countries that are more similar than America and Canada? Like, ask yourself that. Like, go through the entire world and say, what countries are more similar than Canada and America? And I cannot come up with two. Like, you can pick, I mean, if you say, oh, Eritrea and Ethiopia, nope. Like, Honduras and El Salvador, nope. Like Mexico and Guatemala, nope. Like, huge accent, culture, economic differences between these people. The fact that, like, you can take a Canadian, like, from Vancouver and an American, and you wouldn't be, like, talking to them for a full half an hour, you wouldn't be able to figure out, like, who is from whose country. Like, it goes to show that there's no two countries on earth that are more similar than Canada and America. I'm just trying to think, like, any of them, like anything, like, definitely not. Definitely not. And even Germany and Austria, like Germany and Austria is going to be one of those ones that's going to be at least in the top 10, right? But there's definite, like, their language differences are much bigger than Canada to America. Like, Canada to America, you essentially have, in certain parts, some vowel changes and like the use of Z instead of Z, but very few word changes. Um, it's tough. Like, there's big grammatical difference between Austrian German and High German, like German. I mean, mainly because High German is really kind of a northern. They say it's from Hanover or something. But it's tough. Austrians just also have just I think they kind of have a big personality difference from Germany. But Austria is also not split in two and things like this. Big historical differences. Liechtenstein and Luxembourg. I could maybe say Liechtenstein and Switzerland. Liechtenstein and Switzerland, but Luxembourg, I mean, they speak Luxembourgish, like it's a completely different language. But it's tough. Like, Australia and New Zealand would be those two that would be in the top 10. And New Zealand and Australia have a it's similar to Canada and America in that one country has slightly better policies and can be morally superior to the other, and the other is much more crass and filled with a whole bunch of rednecks. So there's a lot of similarities, but Afghanistan, Pakistan. Oh gosh, no. I mean, Afghanistan, like, a country filled with like so many ethnic minorities, compared to Pakistan, like, which has completely different set, and Pakistan, it being a stable country for much longer than Afghanistan. But no, I'd never say that either. But okay, maybe UK and Wales. Okay, maybe I could go with England and Wales. If we consider England and Wales to be separate countries, I might go with that. Have you ever been to Japan? Where does their government lie in the political spectrum? Based on the happiness ratings, I feel like they seem especially capitalistic, but I know nothing about politics. The Japanese are very apolitical. They have very low voting turnout. I was there. I lived in Japan for a summer, and I was there during an election cycle, and or close to an election cycle. And when I talked to most Japanese, they were like, "Yeah, I don't really understand the issues. I just kind of, when I go into the voting booth, I just kind of vote for the person who kind of has the nice, like, the best looking picture and stuff like that." Like, really, like, I was like, really? Like, and granted, maybe it was just the Japanese I ran into, but a lot of them just said, I don't really understand politics very much, and so I stay out of it. I mean, maybe there's going to be a whole different crew of Japanese people that are like, no, you're an idiot. Like, I'm very political, but it's very different from, say, Taiwanese people who are insanely political people, who talk about politics all the time. While, like, the Japanese, it's not as much. But keep in mind that, like, when they have these political discussions, they're over smaller, more niche issues, almost like local elections, despite the fact that Japan is a huge population. They're discussing things that aren't necessarily what you'd expect over here. Like, like pork policy, for example, is huge in Taiwan, where you're like, pork policy, and you're like, oh, it's very specific, like, kind of thing. So this is the thing. Japan is dominated by one conservative party, their opposition, but the conservative party is by far the largest. Yeah, and I understand their parliament. They're a parliament, so like they don't get much change. Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, you've got one party that's in power, and sometimes they might change the prime minister, but it doesn't really change anything because the same party is still dominating parliament. And I know they kind of say also that I've heard rumors that it's kind of there's a lot of gridlock and nothing really gets done, and so they don't really care about policy because everything's kind of slow. But we'll see, we'll see. Um, the Japanese have pizza making vending machines. They're fucking set. They don't need to vote. The so keep in mind, I haven't been in Japan for 20 years, but people made a lot about the vending machines in Japan. And so when people, the story you always got was, oh, you can buy like girls' underwear or schoolgirl underwear or used underwear in a vending machine, and I never saw that. I mean, maybe there was one vending machine that made some news story or something. And so I didn't, when I was there, Japan was not like, the big thing that was shocking to me was the fact that Japan was not futuristic. Like, you watch all this anime and you hear all these stories and you're expecting robots and schoolgirls and robotic schoolgirls, and you get there and it's kind of a dumpy, rundown city like any other city. And it wasn't as futuristic as I thought. Like, the things that are Japanese are, it's not so cutesy. I mean, it is cutesy, but it's not so cutesy in your face as you think. Like, it's not so like Hello Kitty in your face, lights, Shinjuku, everything, stimulus. It's they're, the Japanese themselves were into like small handcrafted wood. They like minimalistic stuff in their home. So a lot of stuff was very simple. There was a lot of parks, a lot of walking. And so it was not so like Neo Tokyo as I was expecting. And so you just kind of, this is a funny thing. The Japanese still rely on faxes. Yeah, fax is still a thing in Taiwan too. So every 7-Eleven has a fax machine here. Has a Xerox fax. It's really kind of random. And when I was there, there was only, this was 20 years ago, but there was only 8 ATMs that I could take money out of, and they were all Citibanks. Like, because just no one had the need for a foreign ATM to get money out of. And so it was a real pain in the butt. Like, I'd have to go downtown and like take out a massive amount of money and then store it up. Because everybody just had their local banks. So, there are a lot of things, but then their phones were very futuristic at the time, but everything else was kind of backward. So I don't know. There's weird things where you go someplace and they're ahead in one ways and head and behind in another. So it's not, I recommend anybody to go to Japan and see it for themselves, but it's not what you think. It's not the anime world that you expect it is, that you think it is. Not everybody has colored spiky hair, and not every girl is a goth girl. I mean, you see those people in certain places, but for the most part, people wake up, they go to their shitty job, they work their shitty job all day, and then they come home, and they go to sleep, and they're just doing their thing, but yeah, this is true as, and I don't know if it's so much from them being environmentalists or just the fact that like Japan and Taiwan are very mountainous. And so it's a real pain in the butt to expand because you've got to level the ground and things like this. And so they're like, might as well keep it as a forest. And so you end up having a lot of nature and a lot of density, mainly because, it's mountainous. You find the same in Hong Kong. Futuristic toilets. Kind of. I mean, I was shocked that they had this toilet where it was covered in like the seat was covered in like this tube of plastic, and every time you get up, it would rotate out the plastic cellophane tube automatically and kind of go and bring every new butt a clean plastic. The women don't have tentacles and wide eyes. No, unfortunately, though they do take a long time with their makeup. They spend a lot of time on makeup. I refuse to live in a country where non-goth girls are allowed to exist. And at least when I was there, and keep in mind I haven't been there for a while, but they kind of associated goth girls with pedophilia as well. So they like they didn't think it was necessarily a cool style because they're like, what? Why would you be into like little girl style? Like that's what little girls would wear. And so that like I would feel uncomfortable, being a person over the age of 20, like wearing the goth style or like dating a girl that was like in the goth style because like they had that association. Um, so it's weird. It's weird stuff. Like I say, like the big thing also in Japan is, you know, I think I've told this story before about Revenge of the Nerds and how um, there's a Japanese nerd character in the story, and he's going around, and I think they're trying. I forget if they're trying to get support or money, and the Japanese guy knocks on another Japanese guy's home, and he's like, "Oh," and he starts speaking in Japanese, and the Japanese guy's like, "Go away, nerd," and like you forget that like that's a big part of Japan too, like nerd, like there's still like the jockey, like super masculine, like you know wannabe alpha males who are gonna make fun of the nerdy kids, like there's all of that, so like they're like manga. It's for nerds. Nerd. Nerd. Um, just like Korea, nobody has K-pop hair. There's like two haircuts and three haircuts for women. It's true that also I was really surprised the lack of diversity in glasses. And I don't know if it's just like one type of pair of glasses becomes the style and then everybody gets it. But it's really weird when I'm like, why does everybody have the exact same set of glasses? And just it becomes the hip glasses to wear, and then they move on to something else or something. The hip hairstyle to have for a while, and then they move on to something else. Um, I mean, maybe it's like America. Everybody had the Jennifer for a while. I don't know, but have you ever been to Florida, and why do you hate it? I don't hate Florida at all. I've been to Florida several times. I'm an American. Um, I've been to Miami and I've driven through and I've been to Tampa. Tampa was really, really, um, Tampa was really, really fun. Like everybody just goes to the beach and has a beer and it's super relaxed and there's great seafood and I really enjoyed it. And Miami is outrageous. It's just one of those places where you're like, wow, I can't believe this place exists. Like you go to South Beach and there's, you know, some some woman wearing next to nothing walking down the street in a full who's in like a tiny little string bikini, even though she's rather overweight, and she's walking by, and then there's like a Hasidic Jewish family like walking the streets too, and you're just like, how is this the same world? Like um just the bars and restaurants are just so out of a movie. Like you walk in and it's some huge room with white curtains and oh, there's just a sushi bar to the side for no reason in this bar, and like, okay, and there's some 65-year-old man with his 20-year-old plaything, like, and you're just there's so many of these things about Miami, but it's over the top. It's over the top. I've also been to Sarasota, which is really weird. Which so I've seen the old people. It's but I don't hate Florida, but just Floridians are they make all the weird stories, right? I think it's places like, I mean, California has a bit too, but Florida and like these areas of America that are super into to ideas of freedom and their concept of freedom. Um, do 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 do. I get these. I'm just saying, generally speaking, when you wear a tiny bikini, you're trying to show off your assets, and I'm usually sometimes surprised when it's like, it's kind of, it's not what one expects. Um, Speaking, oh, it goes there. It's huge different Florida. Speaking from someone who only goes there to golf, I imagine it's a lot of golf courses. Man, I mean, old people love to golf, right? Um, uh, It's the drugs. There is, and this is no joke. In another life, I used to work for the Department of Homeland Security, and the I had to go to Miami once, and yeah, the focus they like Customs Border Protection had on drugs was just it was unlike anywhere else I'd been. Like where it's just everyone is focused on that, and that's like the 100% thing. Uh, and no, it's calling me. Okay, but the and so it's essentially the port to that brings things by air or sea into the rest of America. So it's definitely going to be there. Um, Shaman fat is dying out in the U.S. Yeah, it's an odd thing. Like you don't want to. It's an odd thing being fat. I think all of us struggle with our bodies and our and weight, and you know we want to be healthy, but we also want to be vain and we want to look good. Um, but of course, like the so we've got those two motivations to try to have a good body, right? Vanity and health. Um, but if everybody is fat, then you don't have to worry about the vanity situation, right? So then you've got half as many reasons to work out, and it's just about health. But it's an odd thing because some people have also compared it to addiction, like making fun of fat people. Like anything else, we everybody has these vices and addictions, and we have to kind of understand that and help people through these vices to get to a healthy place. I think what we want is like we want people to be healthy. We don't want people to die. But what's the best way to do it? Like I don't know if I don't know if specifically like making fun of people is the best way to get there. So I don't know. It's weird. I mean but also in a personal choice sense, like you kind of get that like okay, like some things are your own choice. Like you can choose to work out, but then again people get addicted and it gets really hard. People have their vices, so it's tough. So it's it's tough. It's I don't even know how to I'm not ready to be in the situation that some people are. Like some people are straight up like I have no problem fat shaming people and calling somebody fat because that's their personal choice. Like I'm not in that camp, but I'm also not in the camp of fat people face discrimination and it's just like anything else. It's like being white or black, and we shouldn't say anything negative about fat people because it's not like race. There is somewhat of a choice to it, and being fat is unhealthy. So we do need to encourage people to be thin. So right, exactly. You don't want to normalize heroin addiction, but like how it's like you want to be sympathetic, but you don't want to normalize it. You want to normalize healthy living. So it's it's tough. Yeah, yeah. Um, Bloomberg soda bans. I mean, I'd be fine with tax. I mean, as a person that drinks a lot of soda, like I'd be fine with taxes. Um, you I think if anything has a negative externality on society, and I think corn syrup is one of those things that I think that you know paying a higher tax on these things is a good place to start. um, this is very funny. Fat shaming worked for me, and Asian people will tell you you're fat to your face and helps me get motivated. That's very true. They are really like when I lived in China, like man, the kids would just like people that were completely skinny, and they'd just be like, "Oh, my friend Wong, he's just fat and he needs to work out more." And you're like, "What? There's nothing fat about Wong at all. What are you talking about? Like what? What?" But it was just straight up like calling somebody fat. Um, no one noticed. I mean, can you still get soda, or is it just a tax, or what? I think it's like cigarettes. Like if you keep taxing them, eventually people will stop buying them. Um, and this is also true, is that we subsidize corn syrup, and so I'm against that. Like I'm against, you know, distort. Like if there's a negative externality, you should want to take a tax and put the externality back into the cost of the product. All right, this is kind of and so it's really weird when we have a subsidy for something that we shouldn't be consuming that much of. Like I'm all for gasoline taxes, diamond taxes, uh, um, sugar, yeah, corn syrup taxes. Those are all great things. Junk food taxes. I think those would be great. Trying to think of some other big things that where we just, you need more car taxes, definitely more car taxes. Just anything that harms the environment. Gun taxes, bullet taxes. I think those should be massively, massively taxed. If we can't ban them, tax them to hell is the way I would go. Um, yeah, maybe. And the idea is that the ban then creates too much incentive for illegal activity of smuggling stuff in. And so, if you just have it still be legal, but have it taxed by the government, then you can take that money and supposedly put it towards programs that would help and reduce something. So like the idea is if you legalize drugs and then you take all of that money from legalization of drugs and taxes and you put it into drug treatment, it's the idea. Um, this Taxes are good. Taxes are great. So taxes are one, it's how our fucking society runs. So yeah, taxes are fucking fantastic. But taxes are fantastic because there's a lot of products that we consume that have negative externalities. And that those are costs that society is bearing that we're getting away from for free. You know, like you burn a gallon of gasoline and there's an amount of harm that is being done to the world and you get off scot free. You don't have to pay for that, or you pay very little while you get to buy it for free, and these companies I could take something small, chewing gum. Okay. Chewing gum, dirt cheap. People chew their gum, they throw it on the ground, they put it under tables. It's gross, it's horrible. You can't walk the streets of any major city in America and not see just polka dots everywhere from people throwing gum on the ground. Okay. Now, cities have to pay to have that removed, or we receive like a negative feeling of seeing ugly streets or putting your hand under a table and touching somebody's gum, right? And yet all the gum manufacturers get to sell cheap gum. Now that should be taxed. We should tax at the exact cost it bears to society. And your actual demand for the product would go down to the optimal level. Because right now, when you have your externality put on society, you have an artificially low price for a product. It's a distorted market, and so you are over consuming something. So taxes are an excellent method to bring something back up to the optimal level. So taxes are fantastic. They're fantastic in the general sense because they keep society going, but they're also fantastic as a mechanism for putting negative externalities back into the price of a product for optimal consumption. We're talking economic efficiency here. Soda tax would end funding gender studies in Afghanistan. I don't know. I don't know. Let's see. So one second. Yeah, this is an interesting question. Hold on, I've got to look at the last super chat. Hold on a second. What do people think their opinion is needed on heroin addicts and fat people? Is it just cost concerns for the fat? If so, why heroin addicts? What's funny is that I think that people have greater opinions about fat people than they do about heroin addicts. And I think people care more about fat people because they see fat people, and fat people like affect their day-to-day happiness. So like I think people are very selfish and they walk the streets and they're like, oh, I don't have to think about death today. But when they see a fat person, it goes, oh my God, that person's fat. And that makes me think about death. And now they're in a bad mood. And so they hate that fat person and they want that fat person to suffer for making them think about death. So they're going to, can we just call that person fat and make them not fat anymore so I don't have to think about death? Right? More or less, I think what's going on in people's heads, like fat people piss them off because fat people remind them of their own mortality. And their own mortality is depressing. So fat people are depressing. Heroin addicts do the same thing, but you see very few of them, like they're around, lingering around train stations or something. But it's fewer. So I think people think it's their issue, like that they should have an opinion because they are receiving. I mean, it is a slight externality. You are causing other people unhappiness by being fat and making them think about death. But it's not, at what point, there is a point in which you're like, well, despite the negative externality, a person still has the right to sort of exist. Like, I don't want like you take the idea of like somebody existing being depressing as being like a negative. Like imagine like somebody paralyzed from the neck down. Like, do you want to say like, oh, they're not allowed to leave the house because he depresses everybody else? Like, oh God, that would be horrible. Like, so I think this is getting into why people have such strong feelings about fat people. But it's, I don't know how far you can really push the legitimacy of somebody's opinion. But in a general sense, I think we in a welfare sense should be interested in making people healthy. So I think we should try to decrease the number of fat people. And I think a good way to start is to have more public transit and junk food taxes and corn syrup taxes. This is why Americans are so depressed. We see obese people every day. So I don't know. A lot of people, I don't mind people who smoke. A lot of friends, yeah, it was one thing if you don't like the cigarette smoke, but a lot of it was, I do know people like who they would walk by smokers and they'd be like, you're smoking on death. And I think in their minds, it was really like, you're reminding me of mortality. I see a cigarette and I think death when I think of cigarette. You smoking makes me think of death. It's yeah. This is the whole thing. Yep, train stations everywhere are always the place where addicts hang out. I'm sure there's some sort of center of the city transport hub trade reason for that. Americans are depressed because of America. It's yeah, I mean, I do think Americans are depressed. What's weird though is I will say, contrary to what I just said, I think when you do surveys of happiness, Americans actually rank themselves pretty happy. But they might, but what does that mean? Are they just delusional? Like so one of the greatest series I've seen in the past few years is Russian Doll. I can't say enough good things about Russian Doll, but there's a hilarious thing where a guy is talking and he's just like, oh, I'm really happy and da 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 da, and then he says, yeah, I'm really happy, and then he says it a third time and she's like, yeah, sounds like you're really happy. Like clearly if you say you're happy, it means you're happy. All EMTs smoke cigarettes. It's kind of interesting. It's high stress position. I guess I can understand. I am smoking right now, making us all sad. We're all gonna die. George is my obese role model. I remember going to Balticon, and there was like a couple guys like that were dressed exactly like George R. R. Martin, and I don't know if they were just dressing up or if they like dressed like that like every day. They just thought like George R. R. Martin was a good look. Having the kind of riverboat hat, and thing that he always does and stuff like that. Um, hmm. Haha, Preston acknowledged me. Yeah, it happens. It happens. Skiing happiness for us. Yes, the other question is these questions about like are you happy is also kind of um useless because we're not really sure what the definition of happiness is. Like I've talked about this before, but there's an economist named Daniel Kahneman who did all these happiness research stuff, and he kind of talks about, well, what do you mean by happiness? Do you mean like the feeling you get when you're playing with a puppy? Like there's that. Or do you mean like, oh, I feel really satisfied. I'm really happy I ran that marathon. Like I can look back on that marathon. I'm really satisfied. I'm really happy with the fact that like I did that. Um, you know, uh, there's a lot of different ways that we can think about happiness. Like are we happy? Like when you're sitting at home alone, depressed, and you're masturbating to internet porn. Like, are you happy? Well, you're experiencing orgasm and it's pleasurable. Is that happiness? But at the same time, like looking back at it, is anyone like, oh yeah, that's a real moment of happiness for me? Like me sitting in front of a screen, like by myself, lonely. Like there's all these odd contradictions about like what happiness is. Um, so it's nothing really holds up. Happiness is when you accept the light of Christ into your heart. Um, I also heard, there's also this idea that happiness, you can never really be happy forever because happiness is kind of a direction that your biological body is telling you to head in. So, like, when you feel unhappiness, your body is saying, like, what you're doing now is not preferable, change course. And so, like, happiness is like, oh, you're getting warmer, but then you eventually will reach a destination, and so you'll stop being happy because like happiness is directional. Like, oh, you're on your way to something that's better. Great. Like I'm meant to, um, a lot of times, anticipating something is better than even experiencing it, because and then once you experience it, you're like, well, I'm unhappy again, So can't really be defined. Can't really be defined. Um, American Stockholm syndrome, country that values freedom but has the largest prison population. I love to live here, but I always can't wait to travel out of the country when I'm here. Yeah, I mean, the American prison population is real kind of weird. Um, I mean, I will say a disgusting aspect of American culture because it's so many millions more. Like even when you adjust for a percentage of population, that it's so high. When you start thinking about like what is, I mean, this is when you start having these like existential crises about like what is society based on, and like why are these people in prison? Like people are in prison usually for, it usually boils down to something related to money and property, right? Like um, either somebody's trying to kill somebody because of a drug deal, or it's drugs, and it's there, or somebody's trying to steal something, and so it all comes down to these ideas of like property rights. Um, and like then you start getting into like, well, what is property? And you're like, well, property is you claiming a section of the universe by threat of force. Like prior to the invention of government, you own stuff that you could defend, and then once you invented the state is the mechanism of violence to make sure that you have your stuff too. And so then one is prison. Well, prison are people that were trying to get your stuff or trying to upset the system of threat and ownership and property that was established, you know, and you're like, oh shit, like you have these big existential crises about like all human existence, you know, so I mean, I imagine property rights begin in caveman time when somebody's just like, that's mine, and why is it yours? Because I can beat you up. Oh, okay, you know. Yeah, I do think that this is there's so many bad aspects to it. And I don't know, somehow they've convinced people that by having stricter crime and putting more people in jail, that somehow the world's going to get better. Yeah, I mean, I think even what percentage of people are in prison based on marijuana charges, you know? Um, let's look this up. Oh, it's actually going down, but it's still pretty high. Um, I think. Oh, I don't know. Then again, I just hit a bad source, so I have no idea. Um, but yeah, okay. Marijuana is going down. I guess there's not. It's still like too many thousands of people, but it's not as many as I would have expected. But um, this is why taxation is theft. Um, well, we have to start with the if you believe that if you believe taxation is theft, taxation. I mean, by definition, like taxation isn't theft because it's legal. Legal is like theft is the illegal taking of property. But you're getting down to like this fun like why um, libertarians are fucking insane because we get down to the idea of what is property, and libertarians have this weird concept that the property is this holy thing, that the government is violating our right to property by taxing us and taking our stuff, and I have this sacred right to property that is even above the government. Well, why do you have a right to something? Like, why do you have the right to something over someone else? Like, what gives you that right to something? And the truth is that the threat of violence is the only reason why property exists. You can't have property without the threat of violence. So property is the threat of violence. So when you say like these libertarians that somehow believe that like, oh, like property would exist outside of the government or outside of violence is ridiculous. Like property is violence. Like you can't have it. So um you know, I don't think there's anything bad about the government coming in and taxing people. I don't think there's anything bad about the government taking property. Like property is what is property? Like it's just violence. That's all it kind of is. I mean, it's supposed to represent how hard you work, right? We want in this meritocracy situation, we want to believe that you that we all believe like that the harder we work, the richer we are. But that's not really the case. Like we know that we're part of this like big larger system where some people are going to be wealthy no matter what, and some people can work hard as they want and they're not going to get anywhere, and stuff like that. But it's you know, that's the big thing. And here Smitty makes the right point, is that government enforces and defines property rights, so of course they're going to take the taxes. Like who would who would declare, like the big thing is like, who, if you had a, like how would you determine who owned your house without the government? You know, who would tell you that you owned anything without the government to be there and to enact violence upon someone that tried to take your property away. Government's the whole, they're key to it all. So these libertarians that believe that somehow property can be outside of government, like outside of government, is just is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Can we violently resist the government's forceful taking of our property because property is just force? I think that's a bad idea. I mean, you can try. I think the government's going to win. If you're asking me to take some sort of like moral position one way or the other, I don't think there is a moral position one way or the other. Like your property is an imagined concept, and you know, if the government helps the imagination of that, and if the government chooses to take a little bit of it, like it's tough to philosophically like defend, like say that your property is somehow something that's great. You know, like, and this is tough because we all believe that our stuff is our stuff, and we all get angry when people take our stuff. Like, that's my stuff. That's mine. You know, like, I get it. Like, I worked hard. I bought that. It's mine. You're taking what's mine. I get it. Like, we all have that emotional feeling, but at the same time, like, is it really yours? Like, we're all this, you know, like, who helped you actually obtain that property? What system helped you maintain that property? Without the government, you wouldn't have been there. So it's yeah. Yeah, I do think that there is something weirdly religious about it, like sacred about it. Like this idea that there's something sacred about my property. This is my land, and if you come onto my land, I can kill you. Like this kind of, you know, this Texan idea. If you try to take my stuff, I can kill you. Like that's pretty insane. I mean, that's holy war shit, right? Like I'm allowed to kill somebody else if they are of a different denomination because they're unpure. That person is taking my stuff. They're violating this idea of property. They deserve to die. So it's a let's see here. We're back to the salting earth. This is coming back. Oldest salted earth reference I could find is 1755. That's interesting. I got into a little argument later about, so for those that don't know, when we were talking about Trey the Explainer, we were laughing about salting fields in Carthage and how that probably wouldn't do very much, and how it was a little ridiculous. But and I was saying, well, you know, after it rains, like, you know, drainage is part of like crops and stuff. So like, you know, not that everybody uses proper drainage for crops. And if you don't do proper drainage for crops, eventually your land will be destroyed, which was a big problem in the like the super ancient world, like 4,000, 5,000 BC, before they realized that you need to start digging trenches near your fields and letting the water run off. I saw something here. Government collects 27% of GDP in taxes. That's a lot. By what measure? What measure is that a lot? I mean, what's a lot? Like, how do I know that 5% isn't a lot? And how do I know 95% isn't a little? Like, I don't, how are you judging that's a lot? Also, like, GDP is the craziest freaking metric in the world. Like, it doesn't make any sense when you start breaking it down. I can go on a rant about GDP, but even if we establish that GDP is like a lot, but like, how do you know 27% is a lot? Like, what is that? Like, is that a lot? I don't know. Like, you know, it's like in school when, you know, I got an 85% on a test. Like, is that good? I mean, it's ranked as a B. Okay. Like, how did the rest of the school do? Okay. I can do it on that. But then again, like, what if I have a really dumb class or a really bad teacher? Like, there's a lot of these things, like, relatively speaking, like, how are globally, like, US tax rate is really low. Like, how is that? How is this a lot? Like, I don't, on what? I mean, people use these numbers, like, um, I mean, and this is done all the time. Like, somebody will say, like, "Oh, did you know that every day, like, in California, people release 500 million tons of carbon into the atmosphere?" And you're like, I don't know if that's a lot. Like, you can throw out a random number, but if I have no, like, measurement, like, what am I supposed to do with that? Like, what? I don't know. Like, um, if the salt was in huge boulders, it could make it hard to plow. It's true. I mean, it's, you could probably use salt to, like, destroy one season of crops. But why not just destroy one season of crops? Like, it's really, salt is valuable. Like, salt is, like, hard, like, in the ancient world, they had trouble getting salt. Okay, salt was an expensive kind of thing. I know this seems ridiculous because salt is so cheap today, but, like, salt was a rather expensive commodity back then. So to think about the amount of salt you would need to salt the entire, like, all of the fields of an entire civilization, the entire Carthaginian civilization, around Carthage, like, this huge population, and you're gonna take enough salt, and you're gonna ship it all the way out there, and I mean, and some people are like, well, maybe they just grabbed buckets of salt water. Okay, fine. They went down to the ocean and they just brought pail after pail after pail after pail after pail of salt water up. All that labor, and just poured on all these crops. Like, why not just go out and just trample the crops? Like, it's not, you can just destroy the harvest to start with. Like, or better yet, steal the harvest, take the food and leave. Just cut it down. I can think of better, burn it, start it on fire. I can think of better ways to than salting land. It seems really rough. I've never been good at Scrabble. Um, Never. Scrabble's all about, like, knowing the key kind of words. I've never been good at it. Um, uh, I prefer to spend 27% of my income, um, than to have them educate my kid, pave the roads, keep public safety, and maintain our parks. Exactly. I mean, taxes go to really good things. Um, I also, like, think it's really odd that when people talk about, like, oh, my taxes are too high, and then you say, okay, well, let's look at the two biggest things that your taxes go to. And the two biggest things that your taxes go to are Social Security, keeping elderly people out of poverty, and the military. And it's almost always the same people that are like, oh, well, I don't mean cutting the military. We're like, okay, the biggest piece of the pie, and then you're like, oh, so you want to cut Social Security, and people will never cut Social Security either. That's the biggest political no. So, okay, those two are off the table. So then you've got interest on the debt. You can't touch that because you just can't, like, there's nothing you can do about that. And then then you get to, like, Medicaid and Medicare, and you're like, oh, you want to cut, like, medical for old people? Like, no. Like, okay. And so then you get down to these really, like, small, minute things, like, oh, I want to cut the Department of Commerce. Like, okay, it's chump change. So it's all these theoretical people being theoretical about this stuff. Um, but yeah, I'm all for great, more money for education and public transit and things like this. Like, that's what I would be for. Shown appreciation. Thank you, Chris. Um, let's see. this is interesting. You'll spend 27%, but you won't get all of that in return, which is the problem. Um, I would disagree. Like, the problem is here is how do we measure the return, right? So when one spends like $3 on a bag of potato chips, all right, in a small sense we can kind of like visualize how much happiness we get from a bag of potato chips and $3. Okay, so we're getting utility out of the money that we're spending, right? And so in a very small sense, I can imagine how much happiness I get. When one starts like getting to bigger things, and someone says, okay, well, that's how much happiness I can quantify for $3. Okay, let's talk about like, oh, I went to get a good massage and it was $60. Okay, I can kind of visualize the amount of pleasure that I'm getting. Okay. And now people are like, okay, well, how much pleasure are you getting out of, let's say, your $25,000 car? Whoa, like this is a toughie. Like, okay, is it many thousands times better than those massages? Is it worth 1,000 of those massages? 10,000 of, I think it'd be like 5,000 of those massages. Like, you start getting to the happiness, and you're like, well, it's also not fair because the car you use to go to work to earn your money, so it's less about pleasure than like an investment for earning more money yourself, right? So now we're talking about the government and all of that money that goes into the government, because the government is the thing keeping the whole system together. And so people are like, oh, is it worth it? And it's kind of starting from a bad place, because you're starting from this idea that the economy was here first and that the government is some sort of leech bringing us a certain amount of happiness. And it's kind of the other way around. Like, the government was here and it allowed an economy to grow and it allowed you to earn all of your money. So the idea that like the government is taking money from you that you would have, that it's mine to start with. We would have had this great society without the government. The government's just here being this leech. And it's more the reverse. It's more that the government was here, allowed you to live and have your job and prosper. And then, it's asking for some of the money that it allowed you to make back. So I couldn't possibly quantify like how much pleasure or how much utility we get from the government, because the government is the base of the entire economy that allows us to be happy and produce stuff in the first place. So it's super, super, super complicated, and you can't possibly quantify that stuff. Thank you for getting through my soul-crushing job every morning while I listen to this at work in Japan in my regular non-Gundam life with all the god-howling girls and socialized medicine. Thank you, Louis. And it was in yen too. Oh, wow. Well, I hope you're having a good life in Japan. So the other thing, for anyone that's ever been to Japan has really expensive everything. But whatever you get is usually the best of whatever that is you've ever had. So you go to the store and you get a banana and you're like, fuck, this banana is like, it's like $3. Like that's like so much more than I would pay for a banana in America. And then you eat the banana and you're like, okay, well, this is actually like the best banana I've ever had. It's like, so it's always the best that you've ever had. So you get these really small portions of meals, but they're all like top quality and they're the best. So it's one of the interesting things about Japan. So, when you get off from your soul crushing job with your lolly goth girls, I just want you to, sit for dinner and appreciate the fact that you're having the best X that you'll ever have in your life in Japan. And yes, you spent 3 times more for it than you would have in America, but it was the best, Taco Bell can really give you some good pleasure. And I don't know if this is 100% false, if we're talking about the the Taco Bell or not. But um, it's been a great 8 years, and it far beats Miami, where I'm from. You've already roasted. I do think both are really fun places. I think when I lived in Japan, I would have liked it more had I had more money, and uh, relaxed a little. I think I was a little more high strung and in a negative mindset on Japan when I was there. I think I probably should have been a little more open minded with it at the time. I mean, I had a really great time, but I definitely saw dark sides to Japan, and they were always like in my face, and I probably should have given it the same shake I gave America. Um, but I can I roast Ohio? This is the problem with Ohio, is that um, it's kind of just the boring middle America, right? I've spent time in Toledo and Cleveland, and I wish I had more like interesting things to say about it. But it's just so generic America that it's almost impossible to roast, right? It's just it's nothing extreme about it. Um, there's nothing unique about it. You could knock you if I knocked you out and I put you in a random place in Ohio, and you looked around and you're trying to figure out where you were, you wouldn't be able to figure it out. There's like nothing distinctive about Ohio that would clue you in. It's not like if I knocked you out in Wisconsin, you woke up and you were like, oh, there's a lot of Miller signs, and there's some cheese curds over there. Okay, this is Wisconsin. Okay, people are wearing jean shorts or something, or I knock you out and you wake up in New Mexico and everything's made of adobe or something, and there's something that weather wise or something, but knock you out and you wake up in Ohio, there is no way that you're going to figure out where you are. There's nothing where you'd be like, I mean, unless you're like downtown Cleveland looking at Jacobs Field. And even then you'd be like, am I in Baltimore? But like, there'd be nothing in Ohio that you'd be like, huh, like this is Ohio. Like, just, of course, I make the same joke about Luxembourg. If someone knocked you out and put you in the middle of Luxembourg and you woke up, you'd be like, I'm in Europe. I don't know where in Europe. I'm somewhere. I don't know where. Um, do you think Biden is going to cancel any amount of student debt? Uh, so effectively, he has canceled a certain amount when you think about the interest, right? So you're not allowed to. I think his delay on interest payments is it. Do you have to pay? Is the payment frozen? I have to look this up, but I think there might have been that the payment amounts are frozen, that the interest doesn't accumulate more, and so there would be a small like 1%, 2% every year kind of reduction in the cancellation of student debt in that sense. I have to check that up. I don't want to be. I'm not 100% positive on that. But if he does it, and I think he's gonna do it in these small pieces. He's gonna find some specific group where it's not going to cause too much. Uh, he's not going to cause too many waves. Like people like Manchin are against this idea. So like he can't be all student debt. Like even if Biden wanted that and he ran on it, but he can't do it. He doesn't have the votes in Congress. So he's got to choose something. He's got to choose a really specific group, and then do it kind of piecemeal. Like let's cancel student debt for people that are earning under a certain amount of money, or let's cancel student debt on community colleges, or let's cancel student debt on American Indians. Like it would have to be something like that. Like you choose some niche kind of stuff to get passed. But I don't think he'll ever get wholesale a wholesale cut like that. Like I'm just going to cut, like have everybody's student debt cut like 5%. I don't think he's going to get that. But the further he delays it, um, it doesn't need congressional votes, really. Okay. I know the delaying doesn't, but um, I don't know. I'll have to look into it more. I thought I saw something about Manchin being against that kind of stuff, but if he doesn't need it, I'll have to look into it if it's about that. If it's just as simple as a president canceling it, because then it's just, but then it's also like, does he only have control over federal loans? Is this most student debt would not be the federal loans, right? Um, cancel student debt on people with the first name Moses. Um, yeah, I do wonder how much student debt is held by the federal government, because you could probably do that, but I think when people take out debts, they take out student debt, they take it from many 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 sources. Um, yeah, I have to check on that. I have to read up on this. Um, but I know at least delaying it has done a little bit, but we'll see. Um, well, this is also true. Is I myself would not be for a blanket um, uh, uh, canceling of student debt. Like when you're talking about these like people going to med school or law school who are going to be earning hundreds of thousands of dollars, like once they get up to earning capacity, like I don't care about their debt. Like I don't have very much sympathy for a med student who's $200,000 in debt, because I'm just like, okay, well that's, once you're a doctor, that's like 1 year. What I have sympathy for is somebody that was, went to university and is not in a high earning category and has a bunch of student debt, that that is never, that is going to be paying this off for 20 years, 30 years based on their like income projections. So um I don't fall asleep very easily. I never have. um it's always been a big problem. The When I was young, like I remember reading something like, oh, if you take more than 15 minutes to fall asleep, you're like you've got a problem. It's like I was always like a half an hour to 45 minutes to an hour falling asleep, like always a situation like that. um I think since I had like a baby and you're constantly sleep deprived, like yeah, okay, I'll fall asleep easily then. But I always had like anxiety, racing mind at night, thinking about stuff. I did find out that one of the things that really helps, and I found out this way too late in life, is that if you keep a notepad next to your bed and you write down the thing you're thinking about, like just the basic points of what you're thinking about, and it's just on that notepad, then you relieve a lot of anxiety about remembering something. Because a lot of the anxiety is, oh, I need to remember this. Oh, I've got to remember to take out the trash tomorrow. I've got to remember to take out the trash tomorrow. I've got to remember to take out the trash. Like just one of the things. And if you just put it on a notepad, like I take out the trash tomorrow. And even if you don't even read it, but just the concept that now you don't have to actively have anxiety about remembering something, that'll help you. Also, don't have clocks that have the time that you look over at the time. But um, I mean, it all depends on like on where they, uh, it all depends on like what they go into and where they went to med school, and like how what their income projection is for everything after that. When you say like starting pay for a doctor, all right, this is a little misleading, because like starting pay for a doctor means like you mean the beginning of residency, because that's kind of the starting point of your doctor career, but it's also not when you get your big bump, because once you finish residency, then you have like a quadrupling of your salary. So it's true that, oh yeah, I'm going to be a struggling doctor through my residency, but once you get out of residency, you're banking. So it's not necessarily like, something I have like, so much sympathy for. Like I say, like the starting pay is really misleading. Like, because doctor salaries go, whoop, phew. And so now, if you do something like you start working for the government and the government just can't pay you as much, like I'm all for government programs that do debt forgiveness, like government lawyers and government doctors. Um, I'm definitely for debt forgiveness if you become a government lawyer or a government doctor, because the government can only pay so much based on pay scales. And so then like the government needs good doctors and good lawyers. How do we attract good doctors and good lawyers? Well, debt forgiveness. But if a person's going private sector, doctor, I don't have much sympathy. I'm sorry. Um, mm, mm, mm. I saw this. I saw this exchange, Jackie. I mean, the people don't sit in bed thinking about random stuff for 40 minutes. I don't know. I mean, that's the thing is I think there are like what's normal is there's so many of us that like live in our minds, right? Um, I think it probably is what's attracted us to George R. R. Martin's work, because George R. R. Martin's work is very much about like people being tortured in their own minds, right? And going over things and having self doubt and um, things like that, and torturing oneself. And there's so much of that in George R. R. Martin. And so I think it's appealing to people that have these internal dialogues. Um, you know, these people that are like Theon. Um, um, so many people are in a ton of debt. Are you going to quibble about high wage earners when we have billionaires that don't work? I mean, doctors and lawyers are really really rich. So I don't. I mean, these educational institutions like have to get their money. So is the government going to pay for it? Okay. Well, that means the taxpayers have to pay for it. And so now the taxpayers are subsidizing wealthy people to become even wealthier. Like I'm for government aid of people that are struggling. So it gets me when it's like I don't believe in like corporate welfare very much. I don't believe in, I say very much because there's occasional situations like say the financial crisis of '09 or something. Um, but I don't believe in like there's so much corporate welfare out there for incentives to bring businesses places where they don't have to pay taxes. Um, and that's not what our government should be here for. Our government shouldn't be this mechanism to try to make money, and so I want somebody to be struggling before I think the government should be lending a helping hand. That's kind of where I am. Like the taxpayers, who were all taxpayers, like poor people pay taxes too. So if you have somebody if you have a rich person taking money from the government, that's a poor person subsidizing a rich person, and that's what I don't really like. Now, I've got all sorts of opinions about the medical field and things like this, but like, how there's too few doctors in America because the American Physicians Association like limits the number of doctors there can be and things like this, and it's there's a there's an artificial market created where there's too few doctors working these long hours earning massive amount of money. That's not how things should be working. Not to mention the whole medical industry is screwed up in America because of our insurance system. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And so I don't think specifically with doctors and lawyers that's the place to pump our money. They would be down the list of, like, if I'm creating a list of all the people that need their student debt paid off, They might be the last two. Like they might be the last two fields. Like I'd get everybody else, you know. Uh, maybe, maybe. Um, I don't know if econ majors tend to go off and become consultants and iBankers, and you know, I don't know where poli sci majors go and do. Um, but we definitely need more doctors. Um, I have to look up phrenology. Oh, interesting. I mean, I think if there were a situation where, you know, um, when you look at, and this is the thing, you have to go on case by case basis. If you look at a field and you say, well, based on this person's field, they have an unreasonable amount of debt, then yeah, I think you'd be eligible. Um, but I think like any sort of blanket thing, um, I wouldn't necessarily be for. Like, you know, people going to law school and then going into corporate law, like, you know, would I really want the government paying off their student loan? I don't know. Unless you still hey, Glytus is here. I'm still you still have my number to call in if you want Glytus. It's the same link I gave you. I haven't had him successfully on yet. But the um yeah, I mean, isn't this everything though, right? Like I mean, what our political system has become has been trying to give money to the constituents that vote for you, right? So um this is so I mean, would it be a politically good move? Yeah, maybe. You know, it might be a really good move politically. Um, you know, do I think in a policy sense though? It would be fantastic. I don't know. It might be a really good political move. I'll grant that. I'll grant that. Um, Phrenology was disproved in the 1840s. I mean, I get that the joke was being made, but like, but yeah, there are fields where someone gets into a field thinking there's going to be a bunch of money, and then the economics of it changes and all. Um, you know, so I had no idea what phrenology was, no, until I googled it a second ago. But you know, teach phrenology and neurology, and let the parents decide. Um, it's hard to look ahead to 2024. I think that, you know, if COVID goes away and people start feeling pretty good, that's going to be a really positive side to things. But you know, a lot depends. It's so far away that it's tough. The Republicans are really good at distracting us, like inventing issues to be angry at, and then people falling for it, which is why people talk about critical race theory and stuff. You know, so they'll invent you know, in 2020, it depends if like the invented issue they have in 2024 like is a winner, because they'll invent something and we don't know what it is, because they have no policy of their own. There's no policy of their own, but like they'll invent something in 2024 and try to make, you know, Biden look horrible. And you know, if it lands, you know, if it outweighs that the people that you know, or if people have a short enough memory and don't remember any of the good things that Biden did, you know, it's it's tough. So I mean, hopefully it it won't be that way. But it's impossible to predict at this point. It's impossible to predict. Um, I cherish the sweet spots between COVID surges. Yeah, here in Taiwan, like we go outside and we're like there's mask wearing outside, even though there's no COVID, mask wearing outside all the time, and so it's a little weird. It's like, so it's kind of like COVID's here, but it's not. So, are you happy with Biden? This inflation kind of sucks. Uh, Depends what you know. Presidents don't really cause inflation. It's I understand that like the president is going to get credit and blame for whatever happens during his tenure, but it's not really something Biden did. People don't really understand inflation, like inflation, where it comes from, how like you probably like, there was in 2021 there was some supply chain problems that had nothing to do with Biden, so that might have caused some inflation. But we don't really know why there hasn't been very much inflation in the past 20 years. It's kind of a big myth, like a big mystery, not a myth. And inflation is kind of psychological. Like if you think inflation's happening, inflation will happen. So if you run with the narrative that inflation is everywhere and you post a bunch of stories about it, yeah, inflation will happen, and then you can blame Biden and you can feel you can get him out of power. Good strategy. You can destroy the economy and get Biden out of power. That's if you think it's worth it. But Biden didn't cause inflation. Like it's just stupid. It's just you know. And this is all true. Like inflation's good for people that have debt. It's Okay, this is all right, Martin. You win. You win for funniest comments of this live stream. Because real comedy always has like the element of truth in it. But thanks, Biden, for this European inflation. Oh well. All right. So, guys, I've been on for a while. But thank you for I've been on for 3.5 hours here. But thank you for being with me. I'll talk to you next time. But thanks for staying with me. This has been a long one. All right. Later.